And we are streaming.
Hello, we are back.
Welcome, one and all, to the Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 78, I believe.
I'm trying out for my acting career.
Were you trying to be dramatic? That sounded very dramatic. The myth of ontology. So we're trying to... Our initial goal here, anyways, right now is to continue on what we were talking about last time, which was the ontology of myth. I guess we just kind of swapped it around. We're just going to try and come at the same thing from another angle, from the above angle, if you will. And before we do that, we're going to recap, kind of try to get back onto the page of what we were up to last 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I almost interrupted you with asking whether we're just going to recap a little bit.
We must.
So,
right.
Caught myself there, finally. Yeah, may I have the honors?
Well, let's go. What else do we got to say? It's a classic.
So we were building up, right? So can you shut off the mic for 2 seconds?
For you didn't wait. All right, I suppose that was the louder of the sounds. Yeah, I was just going to say casual development meetings, in which one of our primary goals is to simply enjoy our Sunday, every other Sunday, get together, chat about stuff we like.
I will sip to that.
And so, yeah, it's not really, we do actually have a large resource now of transcriptions of, it's got to be, if I had to guess, we're gonna be 500,000 words, pushing a million. It's got to be a million words by now. Just saying, I have some basis for quantifying that, which
quantity isn't quality as usual.
Right.
So we'll admit to that right away.
So what I'm trying to say is there is a high utility for us to be actually recording this instead of just meeting up at a pub or something, having some chicken wings and shooting the shit at surrounded by
one thing we have going for
noisy
us,
people and all that.
One thing we really have going for us is actually the consistency of what we've been referring to as the model, right? And I'm not going to put it in quotes. I'm just going to almost do that.
I think you were going to mention how even the stuff in those days, and we do occasionally hit the pub or whatever, but where it was more common to just either come over to your place with a few brews or whatever. Is that the things we were discussing then make the same sense, by even looking back at that material and the concepts. They make the same sense today as they did then when you try to come back to certain pieces of the model, right?
The only thing that I feel that happened is that every time we refer back to these elements, we have a lot more
context, the word of the day,
and power. Because of that context, we have a lot more language.
Well, isn't this
power.
Is capacity,
stack, if you will.
Complex adaptive systems, grammatical capacities, grammatical capacities. Capacity is power.
Our capacity, yes, that's roughly the.
So we're just sitting here building power. That's all.
There's capacity, but then there's also potential. So you have to be able to be capable of absorbing enough potential energy, as it were. That's
I'm gonna share the stream
nomenclature there.
For it
you have to be able to absorb that energy. It's only when you have the potential and the capacity that actuality comes into play, right? Just gotta make those small distinctions.
Potential and a difference between potential and capacity. Those are pretty synonymous.
Capacity is what you can fill the potential up to.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. They're both building towards the same thing. It's filling the same space. It's just one is kind of actualized ability.
Yeah, so then there's the word power. And power is basically how far has the capacity had been filled, roughly speaking. If
in the moment where energy is coming, going, moving.
Yeah, we're talking about a huge...
Because not all capacities have to be completely utilized 100% all the time.
The higher the layer, the greater the flux. right? So from moment to moment, the power shifts are enormous. They're not like logically laid out. They are
Right.
qualitatively laid out. By qualitatively, I mean like what is the pain, pleasure, moment, psychosis, situational mythology saying about this narrative that's going on, moment to moment. Mouthful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect that to be
Yeah, I was just
interpreted
thinking, like,
directly. I don't expect that to be taken.
Resonance wakes
Yes.
in the up and down of the stack flows. The capacity of some part of that overall system, which is reacting, isn't always like hitting its highest. So
Right.
like if you're at like say there's a lake, a city beach park or something with like rock stone and a drop down into the water, let's say, and the waves crash into that, they're almost never splashing over. Like the waves aren't always coming to that. Sometimes water gets over, right? That's beyond capacity of the wall to hold it, but whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
But you're always seeing waves come and splash into that wall,
try
and
to
then
make it. Kind of try to make it.
some of them
Quote, unquote.
really try, some really don't.
Yeah.
That's in the moment
Some of them
of
back
what's
up.
happening.
And then there's the backup, as well. There's a drain that goes on wave after wave as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like there's a huge flux that
But
you're
what
totally
I mean
right
is,
in that.
it's good to get out of the totally purely mental model and think of, well, this
Something
is
more
actually
concrete.
a moving dynamic system
Right.
that's happening. To have a capacity to do something,
Right.
which could be a capacity in language.
And sometimes
even.
it's underwhelming, sometimes it's overwhelming, and sometimes it's right at.
You look like some kind of professor, I suppose.
And you look like you're bored. It's like,
I don't know. We're
like,
both kind of looking at the same thing, though.
You're like,
so.
oh fuck, he's talking again.
Or am I talking?
It
My
doesn't
arm
matter.
is moving really fast, I think,
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
in the preview.
Excuse me.
All right, so link is sharenated. Yeah, so it's good to think of these things as what we discuss as models that are applying to life, kind of, or like living, interacting systems. It's not, the static thing is useful just to get what you think it is, but then you need to apply that model feedback towards your own memories of things or whatever, or observing, right?
I think another word we can borrow from Buddhism directly, in this case, and I don't mean Buddhism proper, but more like the way people talk about Buddhism, is provisional. Those models, those
Yep.
myths, those narratives, everything we're
I use
talking
that
about,
one often.
they're provisional in that sense. Yeah, but I don't think we ever capitalized it.
No,
Yeah.
no, and we've never really consciously, I think, added it to, let's say, the repertoire.
Of terms.
Just in usage. It's helpful in explaining this
Yeah.
model isn't reality. I'm not giving you what is real to be just accepted.
Right. At any given point, whatever we call model is a provisional
Bootstrapping material. That would be another kind of term I would use.
a provisional, what do you call it? Approximation.
To get the cycle started.
Yeah, because we're not as necessarily aiming towards a quantitative descriptor.
The interest.
We're trying to qualify
The
things.
interest isn't that whatever model is provided, that
Oh, it'd be taken as
artifact
truth. Yeah.
is being asserted as being
Axiomatic.
important or
Beyond argument.
Yeah.
Claimed.
yeah.
Like an axiom, right? Like a bottom layer thing.
But it's it's hard to
Well, I can
qualify.
talk to that because, so, previously we were talking about how you select what your alphabet is, and then you use that for the words, right, and expressions after that. it's the same thing. Like, you have to take a context, so you have to condense what is accepted inside this context, what is outside of this context, right? You have to do this exclusionary operation. So
I was adding chat. Sorry.
it's fine, but were you following what I'm
No,
saying?
probably not. But you could probably keep talking, and then I would.
So
get it.
I think what you're talking about has to do with the fact that while you can have, like, on the scale of writing letters, on the level of writing letters, you can choose any symbol you want to represent your alphabet, but you're always going to select a specific set to enable the next layer up, which is words,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So, speaking back to, I kind of forget, like, the initial point.
It's a
you were-
necessity. Just that there's not like a pride behind the model being given that, oh, this is it, this is the best. That the actual content is not the point at all, but the form of it, you could say.
Okay, so the simple, concrete explanation is like, okay, you can express this with English, or Russian for me, or music notation,
Right.
or a diagram of how electrons pass through a circuit board. All of those things are symbols and little letters.
Different languages.
Exactly.
So the model, as we call it, is our language,
Yeah.
the language that we create. And actually, I wish we had the time or the knowledge and all that to know what the world refers to all of what we're talking about. Like, we find ourselves needing to communicate about. We don't have the ability to wonder, like, what did these people call it, or what did they call it? We don't know the
We have
original
limited.
authors out in the world who already
Yeah.
talked about these concepts,
Right.
right? So that's a disadvantage, and that forces us in some ways
To use our own.
to have to create our own words. But unlike
That's
the
what terms
charlatan,
are.
we always try to fully point out, like, it's provisional,
Right.
This is what we've been working on. This is how we talk about it. I don't know what else to give you, right?
Like, we offer this language if you care enough to understand the larger picture that we're trying to get to. That's the language we've been using, and it works for us. It didn't materialize out of a vacuum either.
And we've got years of development on
and
recording, which is kind of neat.
And not only that, but we also have the experience of looking at existent language and seeing how it didn't work to drive the creation of the language that we do think that will at least give it some chance of working. So one of the notes that we made basically is that the language that is being used is quantifying, and we needed a qualification we needed a different kind of dictionary. Instead of quantifying dictionary, we have a terminology dictionary, and that terminology
Qualifying.
is a
And it's kind of interesting that
so metaphorical.
that sort of language is giving a voice to an inner sort of experience, which is normally somehow completely bypassed by the
Quantifying.
the language, not even talking about it. Like, that just pushes you further away from talking about the inside, or
Right, because
interiority.
For example, like, if you have a response to a situation, it's delegated to an emotional response. The myth behind the response, all of that, does not really matter because there's no quantifying it. Oh, it's just his story versus this story versus that story. Who cares? There's the mathematical equation that we need for supply and demand that's currently in the situation. That doesn't actually personally affect them in any way whatsoever. Or does, but they can't do shit about it. That's a over-the-top example, obviously, but...
Right, so there's tons of systemic modeling and speech and language out there.
Quantifying.
But not a lot of, I guess, quantifying, okay. Not a lot of qualifying?
Not at all. Qualifications, they're relegated to hobbyists and criminality. So you either can do it as a hobby and
Right.
still quantify,
But
or if you stop
it's literally like
quantifying, you're going
the
down
very
the-
experience that the human is having under the state of their own creation, right? It's all of us doing the state, but the human underneath that completely ignored is that like
Right,
that that's supposed to be ridiculed. You point your finger for doing,
Yeah,
for doing that,
the
for
language,
speaking about it.
The language turns it so that it doesn't. Whoever happens to be is interchangeable with anybody else. Hence, it doesn't really matter. Like a soldier in the lineup. Who gives a shit if one falls, so long as there's enough to cover the systemic progression.
Yeah, exactly.
But that guy dies.
Yep.
For the system.
You don't.
And then what?
You don't
That's
even
it. You're
feel
done.
it. Just you're feeling cold all over the surface of your skin.
Well, wouldn't know that. I've never been shot, but
Neither. But that's what it would be like.
I don't actually know how the pain response would be in that situation. On the one hand, it's so traumatic.
Instant shock. Like,
Yeah.
there's not even enough time to like
Process it.
get it to for your brain even to be like,
The fuck
I
am
need to
supposed
start
do?
causing pain because something has to happen. It's like, it's done.
Yeah, it's terrible. On that note,
Anyways, yeah, just theorizing here.
it's worth thinking about. It's actually what the samurais did usually.
Right, as like an exercise of our mortality, and like some of us have to
Yeah.
think about it more than others.
Now, obviously, this is hearsay, and I read it from a book. I've never been a samurai. Hagakure, for anybody interested, very cool read. It's a mediocre samurai who didn't do really crap in his life at the end of the samurai era, talking about what being a samurai is, and it's not irrelevant. It's interesting. One of the things that he was saying is that as a morning ritual, effectively, one of the meditations he would do is picture all the different ways that could kill you. So an arrow going through your body, disease taking
Yeah,
over.
just to be so vigilant of, that's
Yeah.
crazy. And survival, too. Like, imagine how that's advantageous, big time.
Well, the attitude, as far as I understand them to describe it, is you expect to be dead by the end of the battle. You go into the battle expecting to die.
So how can you do it the best?
One of the
Put
things
your
you
full
never
heart into it.
one of the things you never want to be caught dead, no pun intended, is facing the other way. So if if you're laying in your stomach facing the direction of where you came from,
Right.
it's a huge dishonor for the rest of your family. That sort of
Even like, but you have some. I guess not samurai wouldn't be as popular, but skirmishes, melees, where it's like, armies collide.
well, we have an idealized
kind of-
version of the swordsman.
You can't like everybody's going to be scattered in
But,
every way. Like,
I don't know if you knew this, but the samurai stuff begins with archery. They were horseback archers, and then they developed that warrior culture, and that became the samurai today, that we know of today.
interesting.
Cool. So it became a knighthood, which is how they got into swords, and
Yeah,
it became more symbolic than anything else. They were actually assholes. Like, they'd kill people for no fucking reason except, like, they didn't like what they said. And they'd get away with it, too.
Well, how do you
I'm
stop
not,
them, basically?
To be clear, I'm not glamorizing as the samurai. I'm just
Yeah.
tackling different aspects of it.
Uh-huh.
The people themselves are generally terrible.
So we're just kind of delving into worlds and worlds full of myth, as all worlds are. But imagine how different the life and the world, the gods and everything above, to be moving around like that.
Yeah, and how that world changes the decisions that you're making for yourself and your place in it. Whatever the place in it is dictated to be by said myth. Some myths are like you're part of nature. Other myths are like you are nothing like nature, which is what you see towards the west, essentially.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to kind of juxtapose that a little bit, or progress
And that's the chaos order thing too.
to like Darren Allen myths of the system and all that. 32, 33 myths of the system.
Yeah, we have the outdated version of it because we're poor bastards.
Oh no.
Shall we take a small break?
Sure. Yeah.
Be right back.
And then carry on getting into the myth of ontology.
Yeah, you can actually carry on if you have.
Now I'll join you. With that, we shall be right back.
It's just you and me.
Okay, but I thought that's an interesting point.
It's about once we get to topography and stuff.
By analogic, you mean connecting abstractly rather than linear, or like?
Or directly, as in, we're not trying to paint a mathematical concept or like a quantitative
Or like a rigid
illustration.
calculable.
Right. Always as metaphor, always as analogy or allegory or whatever. Mythology, right? We're still making the point that this is all mythology.
This makes me think about kind of like what
Directly.
people would recognize as left and right brain.
Sure, yeah.
Pardon me. When that's kind of brought up.
And this would paint a picture that it's using both the same. aka taking the right brain stuff and sort of quantifying it. This is what quality really is. It's like a quasi quantification, right? Or in the mythology builds the situation of like this quality with this quality causes that quality, right? It's almost mathematical, but again, that's an analogy. See what I'm? It's kind of like you can't escape the metaphor. You always have to speak in metaphor to make any headway. I wouldn't say sense, because again that's quantification, but there is a kind of a forward motion to it,
Sense.
a causal motion to it that is still relevant. That I'm trying to say is relevant.
Sense is the quantification. That's kind
Well,
of ironic.
Well,
Just, I know what you meant
to
in the moment.
to sense
but-
versus to you don't sense that 1 + 1 is 2. You sense the gratification of realizing that kind of a thing, you know. So, but you can't write
Sure.
but you can't write that feeling. You can only write the 1 + 1 is 2. So, making sense out
You
of
can
your,
write.
out of your
You
gratification.
can write. It feels good that 1 + 1 = 2, and I know it.
It's a trivial curiosity, maybe. In that sense, we're not like making even a grand point with that one.
Sure.
It's
No,
more of a amusement point.
We're here to be amused.
Yeah, if it doesn't make sense to you, just ignore it. Is basically, I guess, would be the point. So yeah, we were building up layers, right? So one of the things we were saying.
We're still recapping on from last 2 weeks ago.
Do you want to get to membrane from condensing into symbols and then
Yeah. All through all
expanding
that,
into words?
that's what we have to. We're in the ontology of myth. The last meeting, we were getting into like stacks and layers, and what does it mean? Like, how do you stack languages? These are our mental models we have of different layers of things. Like from atom to molecule to like cells and tissues and all that.
So this is like holons.
So
Before
yeah,
that,
we're
there's
imagining
layers.
life as like the world around you as these like stacks of this potential or capacity or languages. Like we would model it when we look at things out there, like model a tree. A tree has leaves and roots and all this, and that's kind of comes into one. It's like the tree is emergent out of these kind of things and these
So you're talking about parts and sum.
capacities. Yeah, but when you look out in the world around you, you can kind of see it as these layers of things all connecting, and nothing really is its own thing. Like the tree needs nutrients from the soil, so the soil is kind of part of the tree. The soil is composed of this and that. Like you can just go through the whole environment and just see how things are kind of stacks of complexity, right? Some things more complex than others, and things are always built of parts and pieces. The way that this is how the mind kind of likes to categorize and look at things.
Let me qualify that a little bit, if I may, because I think I know what
I'm just trying to set the picture of like for this topology.
So you got the bit. So you're talking about the bits, and I want to sort of give the whole element of it. So,
Right.
And with that, I'm going to use a myth, actually, just to sort of cheekily self-reference our own work in the same way.
Good. Sure.
So the myth goes, you have a boat, and a plank needs replacement, right? And the story goes basically like you exchange one plank for another plank for another plank, and again 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 and again. At what point the question arises, is the boat the same boat or not the same boat? Where would you delineate such a thing, given the parts and the whole? So are you replacing planks
So
of the same boat?
Was always
But if you replace
a
all the
boat.
planks,
There
is
was
it the same boat?
right. So in that area, there was always a boat emerging, an emergent boat that never stopped.
And the
That
weird-
it was always continuous.
And that question only arises if you try to blend the two layers together as one coherent thing. What do you not get is a logical jump from one to the other.
Between layers.
What? So you don't get your
Hold on, I was gonna just give me a sec. Sorry, apology. Carry on.
So the question comes up because you're trying to reconcile two layers as if they were one, but they don't logically follow one from the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's to kind of point out that the ontology that you're using is its own its own mythology.
So if
gu-
that's a paradox,
guides you to you,
if
guides
that's
you
a-
to that paradox.
if that's a paradox for you, that means that you think the boat is composed of the planks.
Or that there's-
Those exact planks, that is the boat. It's like it's one is connected to another, but the boat actually doesn't care about those planks. Just that there are some planks there.
But if you're, here's another issue. If you're so extreme in that understanding, any replacement of any plank would make it not that boat. Because otherwise, where do you draw the
Right.
line?
That
At which point?
and that would be my.
And there's no logical
that
exposition
was my
for it.
first internal reaction was, well, it's the second you replace one plank, that's the boat. It's not the boat. That's what I thought. I didn't say it at the time, but when I was thinking of my response.
Right, and this is to illustrate that this paradox is only apparent if you're stuck to a specific layer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're stuck with, not specific layer, trying to reconcile the two layers as a single layer without acknowledging that they're different layers. And the point I'm trying to really drive at is that you
Right.
can't have the logical jump from one to the next. At what point is the boat ceases to be itself? You either get one extreme or the next if you're trying to be all logical about it. Okay. What is the use of having such a philosophy in the, say, the maturation of your living experience?
Utility.
Look, what would be the point of that utility? The only point I can think of is if you remove the boat from its components, is for a charlatan to introduce another point of value to the specific articulation of the boat. AKA, this is that special boat with nothing replaced in it. It's worth so
mint.
much.
Original condition.
Interesting thing about that is that it's entirely encapsulated by the upper layer
So that's actually
and
a
has
normal thing
no
to do.
connection
It's a normal thing to
to
do.
the bottom.
It's all original.
And as I've been saying before, there's no logical leap up, and there's, in this case, no logical leap down either.
It's all original.
Now, I'm not sure I've said this in the most articulate, expressive way, but I'm hoping that the point's coming across, that there's no logical leap you can make from one layer to the next, neither in the value in the original material, nor from the original material
Mhm.
representing the value.
Yeah, so you tried to talk about boats and planks, but they're not the same. They're not the same thing. They
They're
don't.
not in the
They
same
don't play
layer.
by the same rules.
Right,
They're not.
molecules and atoms.
Boats have different rules of what they are and what they do than do planks. So you can't talk about planks and
Im- and express a
expect it
boat
to-
express just a boat. You can express boat-like things of any kind of variety because the plank language allows it.
planks are very useful.
But this specific boat is its own like little symbol, and then you get into the
Right.
issue of at what point does a replacement of any single plank constitute this original boat or
Yeah,
not?
it's reminded me we did kind of break a couple things down last meeting too, like this about composition and pieces and all that.
Now, to be clear for the audience, I chose the boat analogy not because we want to talk about boats specifically, but because it's one of those myths. There's a myth out there that's already doing that, so I just tried to use it.
Like a story.
Yeah, they're like a literal. What do you call it?
Would you call that? How do you call that a myth? Because that's sort of like just the way it's presented
Contradiction.
as
It's a contradiction.
like a cone, I guess you could say, similar to a cone. The idea of a cone, but is a cone a myth? Cone, Zen cone.
Zen cone. I'm sorry.
Zen cones, where
Koan.
Whatever. It's like a contradiction.
Yeah, those are.
That sounds like what you presented. So how do
Yeah,
you say
yeah.
that that's a myth?
Well,
The
first,
boat myth.
first of all, it's
The myth of the boat. Okay, so you're saying the myth of the boat, that this boat, you're presenting what the mind sees as the boat being all original with its planks, and if you change it, it's not the boat anymore. This is like
So
this is
let's-
what people will believe
Yeah,
with their mind.
This is what
and
I'm
this
trying
is
to
the
say.
target. That target belief is the point
Right.
of the myth of the boat.
Right. So
That people hold the myth of the boat. That's what I wanted to point to, just
Yeah.
to clarify.
Yeah. So if you step back a little bit, one of the other earlier explanations about myth was it's the narrative that you believe in the moment to be true at the time. So like, if you take the boat to be a reality and the planks to be a reality,
Mm-hmm.
which is another myth that they are reality, together that constitutes an ontology, where everything's bubbles up together into what the story can actually articulate
Mhm.
in its totality.
Right. So, and it's like the myth of the professional, that somebody has gone to school, learned everything they needed to because they passed.
And they are expert.
Right. And so it just becomes an accepted piece of reality that gets shunted in.
Yes.
Wow, this boat's all original.
the
I'll
boat-
pay twice the price.
So believing that the person speaking to you is truth, simply due to the fact that they are an expert, without any of the general.
That's the crazy shortcut there, is that,
Which isn't wrong in the context of a fast-moving society
and
that we live
we
in.
generalize.
Like it's
that's-
not. It's. I'm not
it's been
saying
like
it's
that
wrong to go to
from
a
the start.
doctor. I'm not saying that. It's not wrong to go to a doctor.
No, they're the best.
system is too
they're
fast.
the best. They're the best equipped or prepared.
Right. But they
to-
have biases that get ignored. Biases
As we all
against
do.
women and people of color, for example.
Right.
Like,
And this
somehow
is a-
black people tolerate more pain. Somehow women are over-exaggerating their pain. Meanwhile, they just express it maybe differently, maybe not differently, but are just expected to.
Well, every doctor is different. Has their own biases.
Skin
But in
condi-
general, I'm sure you could find through statistics and that.
Statistics say this: cars generally kill more women, and that's due to their smaller body shape. In accidents, I'm talking about accidents. Black
Mhm.
people tend to get diagnosed.
But do
for
women
pain
get in more
tolerance.
accidents?
They do too, because cars are also
That you have
less
to-
built for their
You have
structure.
to, I'm sure, like what you said, they have to normalize for the average.
So yeah. So the funny thing is that I fall below that average. I have the same construction, if you will, in terms
I'm not
of
good
size.
with statistics language, but you have to like account for
I'm basically the average size
like
of
per
most,
capita type
of
stuff.
many women. I fit the bill.
Smaller, right?
And
okay.
I'm even shorter than most of them around here. Cars are built for taller people. So yes, there's more accidents because I can see less than you can behind the wheel. As one example.
Hmm. Right. Well, those kind of accommodations need to be made
Exactly.
by the manufacturer.
Even though I need to be as close as I am to the pedals, that actually hits, as you would, it hits my knees. So I have to also adjust for that.
Gotcha.
Every like little tiny thing, like the angles of the mirrors.
Man.
If I'm lower, I need to adjust it lower, and then I see less.
Pardon.
Small things, but but nuance matters because small things get accumulate, right?
Like I kind of know what you're talking about just because whenever I drive, like say hop in somebody's truck, and they're big, you know, I'm not gonna adjust the seats or anything, but it's like you're like completely stretched right out just to like even.
You have to. You basically sit like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't lean back.
But I believe in respecting the driver's the owner's preference and I usually
owner's
don't touch
preference. I accept. I do draw the line there, however, because I believe safety trumps.
Well,
that.
Obviously.
And I have to be like comfortable.
But I have the luxury because I'm, let's say, average, not a bit taller than I don't know.
Than me. No. I'm not talking about
sure.
the average. I'm talking about taller than me. So yeah, your experience would differ.
Maybe just above average. I don't know.
Well, how tall are you?
5'9.5".
Yeah, 6 feet is already stretching it. So I'd say I'm 5'3". Lisa says I'm 5'4" because
3 is too low.
Yeah.
She has to maintain her dignity. Yeah, he's 5'4". Okay.
Conversation that never really comes out. I can't even imagine that the context in which that would actually matter to anybody.
A party? Like what?
We've been married for almost 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Did you meet Valeria at the wedding? Or before the wedding?
Long before, but
so at the
that's
wedding
where we
is
kind
when
of connected, as weddings often do cause. So yeah, it's been like coming up 10 years for us. Mm-hmm. High fives. Yep, to relationship. It's
I feel
important.
sorry for John. I don't know if you've seen his bullshit.
Yeah,
It's getting a lot worse.
he's definitely, his demeanor kind of like pushes everything away. It's kind of like just no, nothing's good. Like, how is that even attractive?
And it's also ironic that I came across that rhetoric years and years ago with Red Pill, only to see him repeat it, and I'm going, buddy, shut the fuck up. Good guy, but oh my god.
Yeah.
It's like, it's getting into territory of like, kind of don't want to associate with him.
I never get those kind of thoughts.
Well, I mean,
I'll tolerate people for a lot, just to, I don't know.
No, I mean,
I like different viewpoints. and all that.
Tolerating is fine. What I'm saying is that, like, how much of it do I want to see beside? You know, like, I don't want to get involved. I want to get involved less and less.
If anything ever came to you, you know that you would be like a samurai. When they pull the sword, as they're pulling the sword out, the cut is completely made.
You're already cut in half.
So what have you got to worry about?
No, nothing. It's just so
Nothing
sad.
at all.
It's just so sad. Because, again, good guy. Oh. Just, oh.
Yeah.
Blah. Gross.
Yeah, he's kind of neurotic a bit in other ways. I guess you could say, like, has kind of like fixations a little bit.
OCD.
Obsessions a bit more than other people. But
The
yeah,
way
I
he
like him
described the
anyways.
programming is it was definitely OCD kind of stuff. But it's not that. It's the fact that he's talking about shit like traditional roles and ask him what traditional roles are, and it's just like a bunch of regurgitated bullshit that never existed. So
Some
what is
ideas. It's
traditional
myths,
about it?
right? That's not to discount the high propensity of what could be called tradition to be what you could call viable or life generative.
As far as I can tell, it's a lot of ideals.
But
that,
we've
that,
always had
that aren't
like,
based in much.
of course, always had traditions, and
Money. They're based on money.
we should or could talk about this in the context of the plateaus of commodification.
Yeah.
And like what's best for people in the moment may be a traditional kind of approach or value, but that you could see it as a just a progression of the system as it's always been. Like, you kind of shelter within that system, you get your benefits, you do this, you do that, this was the deal with the system, right? That's the tradition, is locked into that, and for the individual it could be a good choice, right? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, there is like a generative value to it.
You made me think of something, actually. Maybe not in the same way, though.
For the individual, there is.
Who believes in certain things, sure.
Right.
And so,
there's an existing mythical contract.
have you ever watched a show called Peaky Blinders?
No.
It's
What's his problem?
It's gypsies.
Oh yeah.
Becoming rich, sort of a storyline. Businessman taking over the industry, kind of deal.
Getting into like the city underground crime.
Why I'm bringing it up, and what struck me interesting about that is there is a certain mentality in that culture, the British repressed culture, that is miles and miles paralleling the red pill culture. The same things are being said, like suppress women, they're whores if they do anything.
Right.
All
well, because
that kind of stuff.
our mind, we want this kind of transactional contract, social contract. I do this, then the people around me do this, and like it all works like that.
And what's funny about that is that it didn't really work for them then. It created just awkward situations, and then people were just feeling like I've been betrayed because I've paid for this and I didn't get that, and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's the exact same rhetoric that's being pushed here. And it makes me think that it was like never working. It was always pushed, and now we're just seeing another iteration of the exact same thing.
By the time you're complaining about it, you're already dying or dead, about to die, etc., and no longer relevant to the discourse or the environment, the community.
By the time you're angry, by the time you have moral outrage, not complaining, moral outrage.
But yeah, it's always on the way out that you complain, but you have no power at that point.
So red pill existed in a different format back then, and before that in a different format back then. And it always looks the same. It always looks the same. Shame the women, enslave the women and children, enslave everybody else who was feminine, quote unquote, feminine disposition, if you will, not enough muscle mass. Everybody else work for the men, and then get depressed. I don't give a fuck. You're replaceable. It's like literally the same logic, just not on Reddit.
King of the jungle.
Which never existed. None of this is traditional then, when wasn't before, because people don't survive that.
And with that, we shall be right back. We're back.
Dun dun dun. I make sounds.
And we had some kind of tangents, I guess you could call them, but I appreciated, I was mentioning, appreciated that we've kind of gone off and talking about some certain movies or TV shows and all that. And what I like about that is that it sort of brings a connection with reality, because these shows portray like human environments.
Idealized ones, yeah.
Sure, right, but to think about different ways that people may have lived, or like give you insights into certain worlds.
Well, funny thing about storytelling, I don't know if you know this, sorry to interrupt, but by the way, one of the things that in storytelling is that you don't do is that you don't place an element onto the screen or into the narrative unless it serves some kind of purpose, right? So it's also filtered in some sense.
What if the purpose is ironically pointing out purposelessness, the potential for it?
Still,
See, it has a purpose.
So what I'm saying is that in myth you can't get away from ideals. There's always that ideological arc that I've been referring to in the other modeling.
Right. And
So-
this kind of brings us back full circle a bit to provisionality of the model, as like what we talk about or present as the model isn't like the perfect thing that should be worshipped or something, or it's provisional. If everybody who reads it, interprets it, or encounters it, interprets it differently in their own way, and whatever initial impression, we each get a different initial impression of that media piece, goes into a feedback cycle, which then completely like scatters like kaleidoscope out there. Everyone is different. So no, we're not like sitting here proud about this is the perfect model representation.
So a really interesting element to that is when we say the model, it sounds very unilateral, right? But we're not saying
potentially some smugness in.
Right. But the model does not refer to like a single
diagram
or a single prescription or a single description or any of that stuff. It refers to a bunch of multi-descriptional, multi-prescriptional elements that all together, synthesized in various different ways, depending on context, again, need to make sense in that instance or that instance. And it looks very different from instance to instance, because what the model is not trying to give you like an ultimate reality sort of description, but just to like pinpoint how to look at a moment,
could say,
how to look at a dream.
If anything, the model is a snapshot or a buckshot of pieces that are meant to refer to something within yourself,
and what happens,
or yourself. So it's always referring. Its referent, if you will, is completely different in every case.
And what happens when you shoot again?
Different.
The spread is different. And that's like a good analogy for how the moment from moment to moment is shaped differently,
right.
Even though constituted of the same elements, so to speak.
And this is why like one single piece of media, like a book that you read as a kid, you read it again, it's like hits you completely different or something.
So
I would know. I try as I might. I don't read books.
So in this case, the model is simply a condensing of words into certain terms to be utilized in certain ways for metaphor making,
right?
Qualification.
And it's the one we like, and we've always acknowledged that. Well, this is just as we've been building it. It will appear differently as it moves into different niches or communities,
contexts.
Different,
Yeah,
right.
So the terminology definitely requires context switching into what we've initially set out for it to be. So that's the ask, I guess, the tall order.
That's actually a bit, mentioning tall orders, that's a bit kind of relieving or freeing, in that we don't have to make the perfect thing, because it never could be. and it'll always, anybody different, well, we can always, it can be better somehow, but like in a vague way. There's never a perfection. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like an art. Communication is an art.
Right. This gives rise to why the primary method of communication is conversation, and why conversation is not like a snapshot of anything. It's just an unflowing
Right.
stream
Yeah.
with beginnings
So
and ends.
For 2 years now,
lifetimes, if you
probably
will.
I bet 1 million words
So the
spoken is just one after another.
So one of the most pointed ways I could bring the idea of Buddhists' idea of lifetimes, people having a multiple lifetimes, it's conversation. It's the conversations that are being had. Those
Sure.
are what lives are.
Because things tend to develop in
And
a
it's
conversation.
including with yourself.
Must have kind of layers of significance.
It's the conversations you have with yourself. Sorry. Even those begin and end, and you have multiple lifetimes in that sense, as an analogy for that. If we equate the two concepts, the Buddhist idea of lifetimes can very well fit into the ideal of the dashboard's conversation. So that's what we're saying. The notion of karma and all of that happening is in the coherence elements of the ongoing conversation.
Pardon?
That's a tangent. That
Lifetimes.
isn't that important.
Yeah, I was like, what is lifetimes? What do you mean? Like.
So a lot of people think a lifetime is you're born,
But
you
what's
live, you
the
die.
Buddhist conception? Okay, I get that. In context of a conversation, what is the life? The conversation is itself is
the
a
life.
lifetime.
Yes.
So it's not a.
It's the thing that is born, progresses to its ages,
And that you're just
then ends.
you're trying to point to that there are many conversations all over the place, including the body talking with its environment.
And the body talking with the body, and the mind talking with the
Sure.
body. Like, I gotta pee.
But I mean, ultimately, life and death of this body, that's what most people would think about.
Yeah.
So that's the conversation between
So
the
I'm
body
trying
and
to
its
explore
environment.
a much wider range of conceptualization of lifetime. If you attribute it to conversation as we have it in the dashboard, that picture becomes way more clear, in my mind at least. Because then you're not limited
Well,
to
Like,
physicality or
let's
any
say
of those things.
you have a relationship with somebody and start a family.
Yeah.
Like, this is all that
That's
you
a
could call that a
conversation.
lifetime, right?
It's a conversation, yeah. Like my conversation with my wife, Lisa, throughout the time that we've known each other.
Or you
had-
could join high school, which is a continuation of elementary school or whatever, and like this
Yeah.
is your educational conversation, sort of, with different sub conversations.
Death of elementary, birth of high school, death of kindergarten. Like my kids go through this already. You've
Right.
seen Valeria's. I don't know what you've seen her through. What she was in high school when you met her, or already past that.
But
It doesn't matter.
I'm
I'm not trying to dive into your personal life.
Yeah,
Sorry.
just
It was-
generally on stream, don't like to.
No,
do
it's
much
fine.
of it.
It's fine. I just don't have the same boundary, I guess. So I kind of forgot.
I always
not
think it's
to
kind
not
of a
step
bit,
over it.
just a bit weird to. It opens your mind up to all kinds of other implications and stuff, like talking personal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what somebody listening or watching could think about this or that, or. Anyways, it's.
Yeah, that's fair, but those connections could be made otherwise. Anyway.
The point
I-
being
I'm not-
lifetimes.
Yeah, sorry.
Going through elementary, high school,
Tangents.
university. These are lifetimes, but it's also an education itself, because it could be.
If that
which
isn't that reminiscent?
doesn't end.
Isn't that reminiscent of chronology?
Education is very fundamental because it begins with the very beginning, you'd think, sort of. It has to, because you start learning right away.
Education in the professional sense is being rigorously managed.
Right.
Beyond that point, once you're
Okay,
already
you're trying to
managed, you
define
just
it.
don't have to need it. You don't call it education anymore. It's like it's this
Right.
task, it's that
I just
task.
meant learning, I guess.
No,
Just
that's
seeing
that's
like
our education.
we have a continuity of elementary to high school to college, let's say, right? You could see that as like when you get the college diploma, let's say you're done. This was your education, quote unquote. you got that piece of paper at the end, and that started in preschool or kindergarten.
Right. So
Right.
after
this overarching type of thing, which had subplots to
so
it.
my education section is at the very bottom of my resume. Do you know what covers the most of it?
Work.
Experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that basically, like, the education that you're talking about, the ongoing stuff, transforms into
Right.
what they people call
Yeah.
a now work experience.
Hmm.
That's how you prove you're still learning to your
So in that sort of way, yeah, experience, it sort of encompasses education.
yeah. But that's the what the section on the resume is called. So
Mhm.
when you're selling it to the
But are they
system,
really separate?
no, but that's not the point.
Right. You have to go with convention, right?
So like if they're asking for a degree in computer science or equivalent, my
Mhm.
20 years of actual working
Or equivalent.
experience is equivalent.
Mhm.
It's far more than equivalent, but that's besides the point.
Right.
And I'm in a weird position where, like, I forget specific terminology, but I know the concept by heart because I don't think about naming it anymore. I
Yeah.
just do it. So there is like a murky area for me to have to figure out the right terminology.
Strategies.
Yeah, AI
Yeah.
helps, but it's not perfect.
Yep. I hear you.
Anyway, shall we try to move into topology?
Yeah, you mean like finishing up our intro because it's already halfway through.
Yeah, so our intro is basically trying to lay the case for layering to begin with, right?
Mhm.
Starting small.
As a logical model approach, a logical approach for modeling life and the world around us. We can model it in terms of
Mhm.
complexity of layers, of growing significance.
Right. And we can even give structure to what makes up a layer.
Mhm.
So why
Right.
my layer materializes.
And it's not just one stack. It's everything can be looked at this, and yet everything shares a lot of its fundamentals.
We'll get to
that's
that
a
with
trend
topology.
that we would
That-
see. Yep, topology is.
That's what the
Mhm.
discussion will bring to the table. So if we try to like localize it to the one stack, the first thing we're trying to do is make a case for layering to begin with, and that case has been basically like you have your medium, which is very essentially is defined by variations of space through time, right? So if you make a symbol on it, like an A, you're drawing an A,
Right, the space changes.
and then if you draw a B beside it, time change. Like you read it in sequence A B.
Right.
So you have those two, at least two
How to
dimensions.
serially process something.
So
through
you have
time.
those two dimensions, temporal and spatial.
Mhm.
The spatial takes up the letters form. The temporal element takes the variation of that form through time. So A transforming to B, transforming to C, transforming to D.
More like A to B to S to T to R.
Well, that's besides the point. I'm trying to make it simple.
Unless you're spelling the alphabet.
Well, I am. The word is alphabet. Don't forget to end the Z.
I think we got it. So it was a valid example. Never
Yeah,
mind.
but the point is that
Apologies.
you're restricting your set of letters through space and time. So now only certain spatial configurations through only certain temporal configurations. This is the point that you're getting at. When does A follow B? When does B follow A? That's the words rules,
Mhm.
right? So now you have this protocol that says only these combinations of these symbols are
The
meaningful.
dimensionality.
On the one hand side, you have only these symbols are valid. Now you have only these combinations of symbols are valid.
It kind of feels like spatial being abstract and temporal being concrete. Kind of, or something like that. I don't know if I said that right, but
Yeah, but it will flip too.
of course.
Look, depends on which direction you're looking from. You're still getting chaos order chaos circumstances.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
from the perspective of condensing it to a single alphabet, we're seeing order leaning from the top. The top says, I'm only restricting myself
Right.
into
There's
these.
always the two directions.
From the perspective of going up, this combination is valid versus that combination is valid, or in this language, this combination is valid, but that not that combination. That's chaos. So French and English, for example. To French, English is chaotic. To English, French is chaotic, despite sharing the same underlying alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
So condension and then explosion. That secondary explosion from the condensed material, the patterning of which creates the next layer.
Mm-hmm.
That only gives us so far as
Right.
to a protocol.
Like I'm able to follow and pull up my own memories of encountering this kind of stuff. But I just know that it's not always, doesn't always come easy to, like, what are we even talking about?
Well, imagine reading a book in French. You know the letters.
We're trying to provide or put forth a model for
Layers.
talking about anything, like anything.
Right. And in this case, we're honing in on the notion of layers.
We're saying, in a way, I guess, that everything can be broken down in this way, potentially.
Right. It's kind of like the information theory.
This is a
stuff.
way of modeling that doesn't contradict itself. It leaves the model leaves potentiality open, if you will, for other possibilities. It doesn't constrict so much as minimally needed.
Concretely speaking, Gödel's theorem it puts us in a situation where
Pardon?
where you can have the language explode from quantity, so the molecular atomic stuff, into quality. The contradictory statements that can be made within any system if it's sufficiently complex. That contradiction.
That's what quality is?
Yeah.
Contradictionary statements?
Well, I've already said it in a different way before. It's the illogical leap from one layer to the next. Where do you draw the line of it being the same ship? A qualitative statement from which quantity can be derived after the fact, but the statement itself is qualitative because there's no logical leap from is Planck ship, is ship Planck. Those logical jumps don't happen. There's nothing to say so. So the Gödel's theorem is what mathematically allows for a quantitative situation, the Planck's being quantitative in this case. This Planck is not that Planck, is not this Planck. They all have different qualities to themselves. One is broken this way, one is
right.
broken the other way. But the ship is the same somehow, or not the same somehow. All of these things, they're not within the language, but as stated, they become the truth or not the truth or whatever in the next layer. It becomes a qualitative axiom for the next layer to work off of. Same ship means that in the myth.
Okay, because
Different
you're
ship
saying
means that in
by
the myth.
by defining, oh, this is a Planck. Since you pointed at something, you're saying that's a qualitative assessment. That's what this.
For
the
that
qualities. The qualities are here for this to be a Planck. Okay, as opposed to this is how many Plancks we have. That's a different type of
Fiat
function.
would be another way to recognize what I'm talking about. By definition, this is that boat. But what does that
But
mean?
I like that connection there between abstract and concrete.
It's all there. I just think it wasn't
the
articulated.
different viewpoints at looking at a Planck. It's either one, or it is a Planck.
Anyone. Is it this one or is it any one of them?
Right. Like to say that's the type or that's one.
If you were to
Those are two different sides of thinking, sort
if you're
of.
quote unquote to patch the boat after it sprung a leak, which extreme are you on? Is it the same boat? Is it the different boat? And the funny thing is, it doesn't give you a room out of the extremes because you got a duality. So the question itself perpetuates a weird,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
um, illogical movement
To
towards
ask
into
the
the next
question
layer.
is it's symptomatic to be asking that.
But there's no logical leap to make from either case.
Although, I guess, y- to a captain, is this a boat? Okay. Like, that's something that would be logical. It doesn't matter if this plank looks newer. Who cares? This is a boat. Like, that goes through the mind of the captain.
Now that you've mentioned the captain, let's look at a different analogy, which is probably better for this situation. Church. The building or the people?
Okay.
Same kind of situation, but different context. Now, the reason I'm mentioning it this way is because most captains aren't about the physical boat, the emotional boat in their hearts, but those are people. Church is a more concrete example of that people can relate to today, most likely. There's no
As being like the planks.
just being on a boat like 500 years ago meant life and death. So we're not talking about the same situation today. If people were to think
Oh,
of
sure, okay.
themselves, the responsibility of the captain is not the same. It doesn't carry the same emotional toll.
Mm-hmm.
Church,
But
the
church
will.
dimension seems
It's closer.
complex.
It's closer to what you're trying to get at, though. Are we talking about each individual brick of the building? Are we talking about each individual member of the church? Are we talking about the clergy of the church?
Well, yeah, then it's like, what is a member? We can count, well, we have 50 members. But
Quantity.
we can look at any particular person and say, is this a member or not? So that's what I wanted to point to.
Quality.
There are two different sides of thinking, the left-right brain. Like, this is all in there. Right?
But then you would have to quantify their qualifications if you were to actually put
Right.
a check
run
mark
something. Okay,
on your
this
piece of paper.
this person has a status of member.
This person
in
tithes,
our organization.
This person tithes only 5%.
Uh-oh.
Check mark. Yeah, so logical leaps cannot be made here.
Right. I was thinking like the wholesome church or the capital C church, but of course there's the whole spectrum.
So, question arises. If quality can be so arbitrarily quantified, what do you do with that?
If what can be arbitrarily?
If quality can so
Yeah.
arbitrarily be quantified, so membership.
You be careful. So whenever
a
you
quality like membership can be quantified by some check marks.
whenever you encounter systemic assertions, you have to run them through feedback. Take them provisionally. Whatever's been told to you, oh, we have this many of that or whatever, or this is that or that. I guess here's 5 members. Like,
So
to feed that back into it and run the process, like,
and the feedback that you get
is each one of these actually through your own qualitative
Right.
process?
Yes.
Is each one of these actually a member?
So always the feedback that you're getting cannot be quantified. It has to be qualified in this particular feedback loop. And
That's the main responsibility. You ask what to do about it. That's what it.
And
I think it is.
qualifications can involve quantifications. So, for example, say the place is near perfect, but there are bad actors. You can quantify where shit fails, and you can qualify the overarching direction of said environment.
Mm-hmm.
If those two don't match, then this is more of a temporary issue than, say, a chronic issue. Usually, this is the best case scenario. Usually, it's the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Right. I like talking about best cases.
And that's entropy. That's just entropy. Like, best cases are, like, rare, whereas everything else is far more common.
Yeah, they're much more interesting to me. Best cases, I guess.
Because that's we are trying to head for the best case.
Rare,
like,
right?
if we are actually practicing our accelerationism properly, right? We're not merely interested in running through one version of the reality simulator. We're interested in what the guidance systems are behind said simulator and what the tweaks are. That's the dashboard ideal in its entirety.
Sure. And what's like the root core of our being? What's the archetype that's flowing up, that's coming into the future, that's becoming
Which is interesting, an
from
interesting
the
notion.
past, from our roots.
Which is an interesting notion, but care must be taken not to get involved in the dream of the future, the anxiety for the future, but rather
Right.
concentrate on the moment in which all of that is already unfolding to begin with.
Mhm.
And so,
Right, yeah.
so this is a different kind of accelerationism that doesn't focuses on the end goal, but rather the process in and of itself.
No, that's I did kind of misstate, I guess, by
No, it's fine. I just
focusing.
wanted for clarity and to sound smart.
And I just wanted to point to a process with a transformation result, if you will, through the process.
Well, every transformation has a result in mind. The problem is that the transformation is transforming. So it's this result in mind now, it's another result in mind, and it's
It's always
through
an
the next
idealistic-
iteration and through the next iteration. Meta schedule.
Right. This gets back to myth, I think, like which myth you hold, that sort of dictates what emerges collectively.
Right. The situation
From
has to lead to that situation. Therefore, the next needle on the record player is going to jump to that track. Another shitty analogy by yours truly.
It's a classic, though.
Well, you can picture it.
Don't knock the record player.
Unless you've never seen one.
Of course, yeah.
God.
Back in my day,
God damn, these people have never seen a fucking record player.
I've seen a record player.
I had one.
I saw one.
Did you have one?
Uh,
My first.
by have, like, I've seen it, and yeah,
My
that,
first recorded books and all of that kind of stuff.
I did actually play with one when I was like maybe 7 or 8. Like, parents' old shit in the basement, like just get it going and like try to do something.
We not only had one, I had my own collection of kid stories that I would
Right.
put on it.
So you put the record on, and like you take the needle from Park and like you put it into the center of the disc, and it
put it on
goes
the
out.
outer edge.
Okay, well whatever way it
So
is.
So you can actually see it.
And then it goes in. Yeah, one way or the other. I
The
forget.
spiral goes into into it, and then it gets really close together. And then between tracks, it has like a gap.
Yeah, you can see it. There's the distance traveled at the center of the record is much shorter per revolution. It's much longer on the outside.
Yeah.
The distance traveled per revolution. So therefore, you need to space them apart differently so that.
So the angle of the needle would control the speed of of how fast it was rotating. So the closer the needle got to the center, the faster it would rotate.
Right. To catch up.
CDs work the same way.
To keep having. Yeah, you'd think so. Yep.
No, I do. I read the manual. I forget which one, but one of them.
Logically.
Yeah.
You want that eyeball to see the same speed of things going. It doesn't care where it is on the inside or outside.
So I had like stories and all of that shit on actual big ass things.
Right?
It was cool. So to me, it's a natural
Records.
analogy too.
It's a fine analogy. With that, we shall be right back. Okay. How do I do that, I wonder?
Well,
Where were we?
I think I was trying to get into. We arrived at the protocol. It's a thing that takes the
Oh yeah,
alphabet
we
and
wanted
says,
to probably
this
just
is valid, that's valid.
we wanted to
this is
probably
a-
finish the intro, which is really a recap of the
Yeah.
ontology stuff.
And we're trying
which
to
is
basically go
the-
from
getting to the topographical map analogy, which is if you imagine
Or
a,
even
a
getting to-
topographical map where it shows like the heights, elevations of different things, and
Mhm.
you'll notice that say one mountain range has many different spikes. That's the kind of image to keep in mind, that
Right.
that even though these say three mountain spikes are spiking out and unrelated, when you go down enough, you see there's an elevation shared in common with all of those three spikes, no matter what. Like they're
Yep.
all there's a common ground that you can go down and back up, and this is the analogy
True.
we use
That's
for
one. Yeah. That's we're
for
trying to
resonance wakes, which is like how to
Right.
communicate from mountain peak to mountain peak.
Yeah.
A peak being, let's say, a high up language to speak about something, English or whatever. Like that's a language. That's even on top of that. There's even peaks and peaks, right? And you can a mistake is to see it as linear mountains, sort of like
right.
because
If you see three peaks, you're probably seeing waves coming out of all of them at the same time. Another analogy that's useful there is antenna. If you imagine each peak or each elevation as an antenna that is capable of transmitting to
Sure.
its own layer and other layers depending on
then-
its configuration.
So like the antenna can transmit at many different frequencies, high and low. Right, that's
Right,
decent.
and higher antennas have more potential to transmit across layers. The higher the antenna, the more layers it can transmit to.
Right,
Let's call that potential.
right. And
It's
we
still
end
an
up
analogy.
we end up finding that well, the highest antennas are just utilizing what's below.
Hmm. So that's what I'm saying.
What's below becomes kind of like a utility of sorts.
Right, right.
Like just dumb utilities.
And the OSI model.
Media.
The
in other words,
OSI
yeah.
model comes to mind. with
OSI
that.
model of the internet. Yep.
So, like, if you want to send a packet, right, you have to make it into a frame, and
Right.
you have to make it into an
Physical
actual physical signal after
signal,
the
yeah.
fact. It's the same idea.
As in a one or a zero, which is like a voltage at 0.5 volts is considered a 1. A voltage at 0 is considered a 0.
for that set of hardware.
Right. And then
Because
you
either
just
set
do
of
that
hard-
over and over again. You're right. If it's if it's optical,
So,
like
like a data frame can be transmitted across the Ethernet cable versus, say, token ring. Right.
Yeah.
The data frame might even actually look very different, but it's still a frame, right? So a frame from a different language. So like a letter from a different alphabet.
right.
This is kind of like the mix and match pattern that I'm trying to get at, the many-to-many stuff that is very difficult to demonstrate unless you have physical examples. The internet actually offers that kind of a situation. On the one side, you
Right.
have Ethernet.
Just so you
and token
can
ring.
have like the internet works on like IP address, you could say, where there's like from 0.0.0.0 to, let's say, 255.255.255.255, there are X number of potential addresses in the entire world of the whole internet. That's
Right.
all. It's contained between this 0 to 255 times like factor 4, whatever you say.
And the language therefore says everything that is being done has to be addressable to one of those numbers.
Yeah, sure. And what I was going to say is, when you're communicating on that, that's the internet.
And that's your alphabet.
At that layer. Now, what allows that layer to work? What composes that layer? The specific hardware and technologies, and whether it's fiber optic or different framing technologies of making actual peer-to-peer connections. That's ultimately what's needed here is from your computer, your PC to your router. That's say a wireless.
So you're
from
going-
your router to your ISP, that's a cable potentially, like literally a TV cable now.
And for
But
context,
yet
you're going down a
using,
layer.
You're going down a layer. You're using your one IP address that you've been assigned to get onto the internet, and you've gone into the cable. It's that
Okay.
becomes a fiber optic at some point, and then it gets switched on. Like you're still that one address, but you're utilizing and hopping over these different media.
In other words, this one.
Just wanted to paint that picture.
So in other words, any one of those numbers in that set tells the underlying physical material what to do with what you're sending it, right?
Like,
each
you're gonna
number is a significance to that layer, but it doesn't know what it is you're doing with the rest of the information that you're sending across.
That
it only
fiber
cares
optic-
about that bit of it.
The fiber optic cable doesn't, or transmitter doesn't care that your IP address is X,
Right.
and it just relays that over with, look, this IP address, they're sending this message, so it's going.
So from its perspective, it doesn't have a logical leap to make.
In other words, it's being used by the higher layers to represent you as an internet, as an IP address user
pattern.
on the internet, and it's being patterned.
Right,
to that
and that's a significant bit. It's there's this encoding, decoding situation that's happening between layers, in which the IP number becomes significant to the way the physical wiring is laid out. Right. However, that's the only significant part that is being transmitted across those layers. Everything else that comes across those wires it is not informative to the underlying system, because those numbers don't help it navigate in any sense. And conversely, if you were to choose a different data framing network, it would be a totally different set of signals, and it would still be able to transmit across wires just using a different method.
To speak ones and zeros, that's all you need, from point to point.
Yeah, like token ring is a physical setup. Ethernet is a physical setup. Between the two of them, there's a different set of numbers.
To elaborate a little bit different, the IP address is the internet layer, and it's composed of a vast web of peer-to-peer links. A link is a single connection between nodes, between routers, let's say.
Hosts.
On an interface, you can send a message to another router.
Host.
On
I like host because it's more direct. A router can be a host.
Sure. The point is, all we can ever do is communicate with, say, our Wi-Fi router.
Yeah.
That we can only ever send signals. It's up to it to do stuff. And that emergent epiphenomenon of quote-unquote doing stuff, where a packet transmits from one side of the world to the other just because I talk to my router, my Wi-Fi router, peer-to-peer link, and just as everyone along the way, all they ever knew was who they're directly connected to.
Right.
Yet something emerged higher, which is that packet transmitting across, right?
Right. So it went beyond the numbers. It used the alphabet. It used the alphabet to send certain sentences and words across the wire that became paragraphs that assembled into chapters that assembled into whole pictures, if you will. Whether it be a program, whether it be
Not
an
sure what
image.
part you're talking about, because packets get split apart and sent in multiple pieces.
So you're
Let's say
going
sending
you're
a
going
file.
down the layers,
So-
and I'm building them back up.
Yeah, you're building back up at the other end. So
Yeah.
the other end is what's reconstructing all
Right.
of this.
Right. So I'm just
Right. It doesn't,
completing
along
that.
the way, the things only need to know about their partner and the IP address type of thing. Right. The routers don't care about reconstructing. It's just a data stream.
They care about IP, but they also care about payloads. There's another aspect to this. So when you're talking about a data packet, it has the destination IP and then the payload. So not only does it actually just route,
Of course.
it has a thing that is being routed.
A packet
besides that
is
point.
called a packet, maybe because it packages something into a packet. Those are the higher layers sent by, say, your web browser as a request. I'm requesting to this server this website. So give it to me. Okay, now it's coming. Those
would you be
packets are
able to
coming
say
back.
that the address information is basically like the category under which the rest of the information gets stuffed into by the system? A bigger, more abstract analogy, it's like in the layer you have this thing that is
Seems
identifying
same
as
thing.
with
It's like
a
a
header,
summarization.
and it's like, okay, plug it into this category, it goes there because of that header, and then whatever happens in that category based on the payload keeps the process running on a deeper layer or a higher layer.
Well, typically what happens is there's, on top of IP, there's TCP, which is the port, which is like, okay, it's port 80, it's a web server. Now, when the system, when the network card receives that to its IP address, the computer's like, now, okay, I've got this packet, which port is it going to? Oh, this is a web server I'm listening on. Or I'm listening on a messaging, an email server.
So what does it say about the payload? The payload contains within itself another address.
Just
Not
language at a different layer.
Yeah,
The address is meaningless.
The next address.
Right. Which is
And then
meaningless to IP.
And then it has its own payload. What happens then? That
It
gets
unfolds completely up to the application layer.
which categorizes that piece of data as this category, that another address is what I'm saying. The process repeats itself on each stage in each layer.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your identifier slotted in there. That slot will look at identifier, slotted in there. Identifier slotted in here. On and on and on it goes. That's how you get your layers. Well, that's not how you get your layers. That's where you distinguish your layers.
Mm-hmm.
Contexts and the rest.
Right. We're pointing to this structure that lets you build things like Lego pieces.
Funnily enough,
A language model.
Funnily enough, this also correlates to beginning, middle, and end, which correlates to narratives, which correlates to resonance wakes, which correlates to, qualitatively speaking, like it's got isomorphisms between those concepts. Each packet is a story, right? And
Sure.
it has an ending. But they're in the hyper-narrative, so their ending does not mean the hyper-narrative's ending. It just means that a piece of the narrative, subplot.
Think I see what you're getting at.
I'm just saying there's a relationship with the whole beginning, middle, end that constitutes individual signals, packets, and between layers, expressions, and the idea of lifetime and the idea of narratives.
This reminds me of the membrane arising and
the
falling
whole
potentially.
conversation concept, yeah.
It's like an environment. It creates it, like the handshake to open up when I go to a website, that creates an environment which is like
the birth.
It's like a state kind of, which is
It's birth.
active, and then you're like, whenever you send more packets, it's just like, oh yeah, this thread that's going on,
Evolves.
that's
it
what I'm
evolves.
talking about.
Yeah, it evolves, and then eventually you're done with the task. Conversation ends.
Everything times out.
Or bottoms out. For example, if it's a purchase, it's at the end of the shopping cart,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So it's a useful analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you see story, you see myth. Myth, it means that there's rules, and that it makes it a reality, and that reality gives you an ontology.
That's interesting to say. Myth means that there are rules, but we're also trying to portray myth as something that's common. That is how we operate. We operate by myth.
Well,
We're saying what we do is mythological.
Well, I was working
as
to
as
try to
people.
describe protocol to begin with. I was trying to say, hold on, well, they have this sequence of symbols combined into a word, different words combined into a sentence. What makes that work? The protocol. That's the protocol behind the thing, the grammar, the.
And this is on the ontology side.
How the ontology gets built up, yes.
Mm-hmm. But then, naturally, to us humans, we don't just think in schematics. So there's a story that's told with this that can be brought up at any time if the myth is challenged or anything like that to sort things out.
Well,
This is the story
one
of
of the freedoms that narrative has is switching contexts, which is closely tied to the relationship we
Right.
had with the APS programming language and subjects. You can find yourself on one
Yeah.
peak,
And I was going to say
resonate,
we
and that's
always-
a different peak now.
we communicate in analogies all the time.
That was another thought I had, and I wasn't sure how to frame it, but I was thinking of like, prose is alien to us, memes is what we actually do. We mimic and re-express analogous
Sure.
contexts all the time.
Right. So you're saying
The way we speak, anyway.
mimicking behavior is far easier than expressing.
No, that would be itself a
Story of it?
mimicking and
Right.
behavior, but it's far more
The
alien.
explanation of
Prose.
it. Prose.
Prose is far more alien because
Prose, as in like speaking free, openly to talk about something.
within the confines of the language rather than the confines of your experience.
Is that how do you define prose? It's
proper grammar, proper sentences, proper everything structure,
so
not
systemic.
not poetry.
Left
usage.
brain, if you will.
Yeah.
To carry on the analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, anything to do with trying to mimic reality directly. Which is itself a form of mimicry, which becomes memes by definition, even though it's an attempt at not utilizing the same mechanism. So, going for a disprovable experiment, but you're still building up the experiment through the very much cultural assumptions of your understandings. If you put this together, that means that. If you put this together, that means that. And if you do get this result, it means that. So the level
You're
of
talking about
I'm not
like,
talking about the level
like
of accuracy.
dogma. You seem to be getting at dogma. I was kind of gapping out
Get
there.
it's getting
be
to that
honest.
point, but it's like it's not making a comment about the accuracy. Like an experiment can be accurate or inaccurate. The way you get to it is the same. You make assumptions. Assumptions are driven by whatever narratives you believe to be true in reality.
Mhm.
So the end result is going to be framed by your initial assumptions.
Pretty good.
So let's get into the topography.
Yeah.
All right.
I feel like let's give you a couple minutes
Yeah.
because we've been building this up so much, and we kind of want to cap off what we were doing last time.
Yeah, I want to get through a couple of steps specifically.
Ontology, how it's built mechanically through layers.
So we've given there to be a room for layers. We haven't actually given the reason for there to be layers, even if there's room for them.
A reason,
So we touched on the concept called membrane.
but we pointed at atoms and molecules as being like,
So
well,
that's
duh.
we need to enclose
Things complexity increases like that.
So yeah, to enclose the membrane. So to get there, we need to close the membrane to give an inner and outer environment. So to do that, we have to
And
get
again,
to
this is a
nature of
mental
membrane.
model.
Yeah. So
Mental model.
most people think of a membrane as like a wall, right? And that's kind of like not the correct
Right.
concept. You should think more like a dot
You can
into
see
which
it.
a
I
signal
think
comes in.
you could see it as a patchwork of protocols which kind of resemble a wall, maybe, right?
What defines a membrane is the fact that it has at least one protocol that gets a signal in, signal out.
This is a holonic modeling concept, I think, which
Yeah.
is that
And this
you
is like
don't
before-
you don't just
this is before-
automatically assume exclusion.
Yeah, and this is
You
before
assume
you get,
inclusion.
and this is before you get to any of these complicated processes. We first need to hone in on this dot in space, so to speak, which takes in a signal, produces a signal, and what it takes in and produces are dependent on an internal protocol. So that idea of a spot in which can transform one signal to another.
This is like an ideal protocol expression.
Right.
We can try to express what it is, but
So now, the next phase of that is you extend this concept to that dot potentially containing one or two or more protocols. So you're not limited to necessarily a single one.
so
It's
containing
just
dots.
Right. It's a hypothetical dot. It's only to give it the contrast in 3D space or
Right.
2D space so that you can visualize something.
I guess I like to imagine spheres. That's a pretty common.
So signals go in, signals go out. The way the signals are transformed is dictated by the protocols within the dot. So depending on which protocol the signal is coming from, is going to dictate how the signal coming out is going to be within that medium.
And this is some kind of, you could call it at that point maybe an agent in an environment which is doing something.
No, not yet.
Okay.
An agent's going to be a build-up off of this. The next phase is to stretch this dot into 2D space and enclose an inner from an outer environment. So if you had a dot in a 2D diagram, you would extend it into a circle, and so that anything that is inside that circle has to be a product of the boundaries
Okay.
protocols.
So based on what this protocol does, you're constructing an image of the ideal world that it creates on the inside. Kind of like a fantasy land imagination.
So the inner world will be
That's
some
the inner.
some kind of reflection
Not that
of
it
the
necessarily
outer world.
exists as if there's inside and outside of this. We're talking about things interacting in 3D space through time. This messy
in a
soup.
logical membrane. What we're talking about is a
Right.
logical membrane, not a physical one. At this stage, we're just talking logic. Not really, but in some sense.
Right. Well, we're building myth, right? So the point is to take it on. To
Right, as a
reify-
reality.
Right.
So, in 2D space, if you take a dot and you just start to draw a circle around it, you start to see an effect. All the signals coming from the outer environment are the same, but the signals that would be coming back out all go into the main, the what's encircled. So there is no logical leap between the two environments anymore. There's only a protocol leap, whatever that protocol happens to be. And somehow this has to reflect the other, or else it
So
perishes.
you're pointing at when energy comes in and hits this dot. Normally, it's predictable on that layer what passes through and what energy comes and goes. But this dot kind of adds a stack onto it, which in real time, it's like the wave crashing against the wall or something. The potential comes up, and then new signals come out that are completely unpredictable to the original system.
Right.
Is kind of what
So
the picture.
the isolation, this internal membrane versus external.
You can't. It can't be described
environment, sorry.
in terms of this larger wave. It's a special one at the top, which causes its own signals, and you can't understand why the water pushed this way and that way
You have a qualitative isomorphism. So
from the lower perspective.
microbes, for example, there's this one microbe when it hits a wall, the deformity on its body causes a specific chemical loop to happen. That chemical loop shuts off a single side of it and increases activity in the other side, so it turns.
Pushes around.
Right. So
It's like a nerve just shuts off whatever you ran into something, that part of your body just dies and everything else starts shuffling away, and you navigate around an object.
So not only is the internal environment different from the external environment, it's also a copy of it in some sense. So that internal environment, like that reaction that if you hit a wall, you must shut off part of the body and turn, is both an internal representation of the external environment and
So
just
that's a great
protocols
example,
working
which I think
themselves
people
out.
can understand. That's like an amoeba, if you would
Yeah,
study.
it's just like singular cell stuff.
You've got inner chemistry reflecting, and I think the key word here is
The outer.
isomorphically
Where it lives.
the outer.
Because if it didn't, what happens to the inner
Right.
structure? It gets destroyed by
If
the outer
like
environment.
say when you run into something, maybe I don't even know, the backside turns off, but you just keep pressing towards it or something.
Right. So
Towards the object, but your backside's numb. Well, that's not good enough.
yeah, so it's literally those signals correspond with not only like, oh, I hit a wall, but also the correct response to hitting said wall from the said direction.
Right.
Right? So like the environment is mapped in that sense into that
Mhm.
creature.
And
So the membrane does not create a very different environment
interestingly,
physically, but logically
this
it
type
makes no
of
different. It makes no sense to the physical environment either.
this type of theoretical map becomes really interesting, I think, when you try and logically think about the history of our planet, like the myth of the origins of Portal Mountain, if you will, like the sun baking soups of molecules on Earth,
That only try to dissipate energy back
dissipation of heat,
out, of which replication becomes the most
efficient
cheap,
method
the cheapest method.
of
Literally.
just letting heat away
Yeah.
as fast
Fast-
as possible.
So that extra heat allows for the extra energy for the more complicated structures to formulate in the first place, and those more complicated structures are more efficient at dissipating heat.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's then there's pressure for it's the only ones that can produce more of themselves, because that's the fastest fucking way to get rid of the heat.
Obviously, if you replicate, there's more
So those become
heat
the
dissipators.
So those become like not likely to occur in nature, but the most likely in that situation, because those are the only things that would work.
Replicating, self-replicating.
So while self-replication is not likely to just occur, under those conditions, it's like the only thing that is likely to occur.
That's fundamentally different from what's going on.
And that's that this paradoxical
It kind of feels like
thing.
a layer jump.
Well, in the same way, like a spot is available on the next layer in Gödel's
This
theorem.
is the Genesis layer jump.
So, a spot is available in Gödel's theorem for the following sentence: I cannot be expressed in this system. So like there's like a spot created for it, and now you have an energy tension that's vying to like occupy the least.
I cannot be expressed in this system. I feel like I've heard
That's Gödel's theorem,
that before,
essentially.
but explain again how that relates, or what point you were bringing up.
So, system means formal system.
One not knowing about the other.
System means formal system. A formal system with what's called an axiom, rules, and rules dictate how you can take what you have in terms of an axiom or a theorem and derive the next possible permutations of the string. So if you if in the system you can say an A can transform into a double A and a double A can transform into a B, then you can have logical steps into getting a B out of A.
Right.
So a formal system dictates those potentials.
This is kind of rational left brain type, to bring that analogy back.
Gödel comes along and says, no matter how you first set up the system, if it's complex enough, it will make the following statement. I cannot be expressed in this system, the one I'm part of. So you take your axioms of the system, you go through all the possible theorems to infinity, build up from all the rules. You will never find that sentence.
By this system, it's the one that's the language it is being utilized in to
make the expression. To make the expression.
Mm-hmm.
So you take the expression and you try to find it through the axioms, and you can never reach it. Like, it just never happens. However, it's a valid expression of the system.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a slot for it in that system.
By its very language,
so
it excludes itself.
the key component is that the truth of the statement appears from the fact that it cannot be expressed in that system. So even though it can never be
It's like
expressed
a
by
taunt-
that
it's a
system,
taunting-
it is in that
It's
system.
taunting the system.
And that's the incompleteness theorem. There's always that one sentence that is above it.
Right.
And it's still correct.
To narrow in on that, this is trying to give a very concrete and pointed, almost like, I guess, mathematical
Grounding, yeah.
point or grounding of this concept.
That's what
That between layers,
that's what
there
Hofstadter is
becomes
frustrated by.
there's a necessary ignorance of what's below.
This is what
For every layer that emerges, including like our APS and understanding our ontology of what exists in the world, there's a disconnect at every point.
So yes.
There's a frustration all through the body,
So
even up to our own
Hofstadter's
understanding.
whole claim to like why he's frustrated with GEB, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and it's misunderstanding by a mathematician, is that they don't see the connection between a fundamental layer jumping up one. Like they don't see the significance of the statement to begin with, or how that correlates to layering in complex adaptive systems. Like none of those
Right.
mental connections,
Okay.
associated
And that's
associations.
that's what that statement is a jump into something even beyond its own language.
Right, because you have
which it's composed.
because you have a truth, a reality, an ontology
Mm-hmm.
that is illogically
It must
a jump
break you out.
from.
That's showing you your own processes. It jumps you out.
And the fact of these statements is the fact of self-reference and how it's inescapable. So no matter how complex a system becomes, like the whole idea of getting rid of set theory of self-reference will only inevitably lead right back to self-reference. It's biblical because it circles back and it refers back to
Interesting
itself.
how in that sentence, I am something that can't be expressed, right? I, evoking a self
That's the other side of the coin.
reference, right?
So
Right in there.
So what we're describing from bottom up, what you're saying is top down.
This statement has been made as if the myth is...
You
existed.
assert the I.
Mhm.
The I is asserted, and as soon as it's asserted, it's within the ontology. And regardless of it being there or not, that's the contradiction part of the incompleteness theorem. Like you can go with either I am provable within this state, within this framework, or I am not, and both are true. Now you have a contradiction.
There you go.
And so no matter how formal your system is, it'll never capture the entire picture, because the next layer is again illogically leaped, so to speak, emergent out of that.
Mhm.
That's
In other
where-
words, a provisional approximation. Whatever our understanding or modeling is of this has to be taken provisionally. This is the anti-charlatan medicine, or that would be part of it.
It means that also that our myths also don't need to be strictly materialistic or spiritualistic or any of those things. They're interchangeable also in the same sense.
Mhm.
That's a difficult thing to sell, in particular because I don't have great examples for this. But at the very least, it's a way to get along with people. The theist versus the atheist versus
Yeah, I was reminded of the spectrum of stupidity, and it's which isn't an insult. We're all take part,
we're all on the spectrum.
but there's like philosophism, scientism, spiritualism, religionism. Not sure about the order. Something like that, though, right?
If you think about it, up, down,
Yeah, philosophism,
left,
scientism,
right.
and then I always thought of it as a down zig, and then you go over to the other side, and it would be
religionism at the top.
religionism,
So
spiritualism.
more atheistic on the right, more theistic on the left.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to put that chart together in my head. You got a crisscross.
Mm-hmm. Objective, subjective,
Scientism,
subjective.
yeah, the scientism above philosophism, if you will, right? scientism below.
Yeah, scientism, extreme objectivism.
Objectivism. So then which of spiritualism and religionism?
Is extreme.
So religionism is more
solipsism.
objective, right? And the spiritualism being the extreme
Solipsistic,
of
yeah.
subjective, right?
So not subjective, but
the
solipsistic.
religionism being more orderly or ordered, if you will,
Trying to
as
bring
scientism as opposed to philosophy.
So trying to bring order into chaos.
Right.
So it's
yeah.
Chaos,
Top
chaos,
down and
chaos,
then down up
chaos.
thing. Yep.
Trying to bring order into chaos. Trying to bring chaos into order.
So
trying
like
to bring order into order.
the scientismistic and religionismistic, putting order down, trying to from above, and on the other side we have philosophism and spiritualism on there. Either they're
They're the I don't know crowd. Also known as the left. Just I'm being a dick.
I haven't tried.
I am being a dick.
We got.
But it isn't not.
That's going to be our
without
next
merit.
episode. Let's get into some more taboos. We broke down lots of other stuff in the past. Why not? Well, we've touched on politics a lot, left and right, and we've kind of tried setting up this idea about
They're both wrong.
being like both extremely one way and another. It's like kind of a way to say neither, but also a way of saying that both are arbitrarily divided and conquered in a way, which is reminiscent of like this left brain, right brain, or chaos and order division, which is natural, but it's solidified and crusted.
Taboo time. Feminine and masculine.
I guess, yeah. So the left is feminine, the right is masculine.
If anybody knows about our myths with regard to men and women, they should be okay. I'm just jabbing.
Yeah, but so the idea is that the political version of it is a perversion of what would be truly understood about those
That's a fun
concepts.
word, truly.
Truly understood. Well, capital T, right?
Sorry, I'm getting a bit inebriated.
Likewise, my dude. We've got about maybe an hour left.
All right. So I actually
Have we introduced?
Yes.
Did I give you time? I interrupted you after like a couple minutes. But the topographical maps.
So,
idea of
hold on.
signals coming up and down stacks to communicate.
Just hold on. Yes. The answer.
Let's recap.
The
Okay.
short answer is yes.
I'm giving
We
you
started off with a membrane as
5 minutes.
as a concept, and that's the thing. Like acts as a translator node. The only thing we know about it is that it has quote unquote protocols,
membrane.
which means that it takes a certain pattern of signals in, and it expresses the certain pattern of those signals out.
Pattern in, pattern out.
And then
Protocol.
then we've extended that into a 2D space, and made a creation of this membrane encircling as a circle, which would mean that the patterns going in and the patterns coming from
It's like
might actually be due to different protocols now.
ontological framework. It feels like you're just
Yeah.
scaffolding some ontology.
So now once we have this circle, we have a reason to claim a layer. So the inner stuff, the inner environment, because it's all entirely guided by protocol.
And by
Could
a layer,
have-
it could be a layer where these three mountain peaks all understand where they all come from.
We'll get
let's
to
say.
that. We'll get
Let's
to that.
say.
Let's just build a
But these
peak.
are the layers that you're
Let's
talking
just
about,
build a
right?
peak. Yes. Yes.
This is a membrane. Is
no.
that layer?
No, we got to an agent. We finally got to an agent.
Oh.
So the agent is the set of inside interactions in the inner environment that exerts signals out to the outer environment, but is entirely contained by a membrane, which means it has its own potential for language. The protocols entirely encompassed within, don't have to go by the exact same rules as the outside.
I'm feeling that like
the
holonic
containment.
modeling here.
Yes, this is
And
this
the
is the holon.
agent as holon itself, and plus all the layers we've
So it's
just
like a
gone
molecule.
through.
So it's like a molecule,
Right.
and then it's like a macromolecule. But the point being is that we've finally resolved to have an inner environment and an outer environment, and that encompassing unit thing, whatever you want to call it, is the holon, is the agent, is the thing that the car diagram goes through.
Okay, and this is ontology. This is like APS. This is, in other words, in perception, how people think about building and constructing realities, as in how you would kind of break them apart scientifically.
More importantly, it's the two layers of the stack. It's the significant and the fundamental below it. We're given a reason that they're encompassing of the membrane, right? Besides being the agent, besides being a separate environment, gives us the claim, the window for the claim that lower layer, higher layer. The inner environment will constitute a higher layer. It has its own language. It has its own stuff.
Right.
Now, in order to get that stuff out onto another unit of its own kind, it has to press its energy through the inner membrane, spew out something. That something has to be picked up, absorbed, and reconstituted over here.
Right.
So now we're building that picture.
And so this
Now we have mounds.
original stack or mound which tried to replicate itself must be part of some giant, larger, extra context which is allowing this to
That's
replicate.
called the medium. So it has to take all of its potential energy, squeeze itself out into the ether.
Right, but I'm
signal
saying it's
through
got to
the-
be part of some bigger life form or something. It's got to be a part of.
Well, if you're looking
Some
at
other-
individual units
I'm
like
just saying
cells,
it's all connected. It's not this
well, think
mountain
about
peak.
think about microbes.
It's not a mountain peak on its own, and everything is kind of diffused, if you will. There's no solid boundaries of what
Okay.
is in the inside of the membrane
I
or the
think what you-
outside.
I think
And
what you're-
membranes overlap. That's a thing that should break.
I think what you're hitting-
linear views.
I think what you're hitting at is that molecules don't cease to be atoms, and anything that happens on the atomic layer will affect naturally the molecules that encompass above them. But at the same time, not all the atomic reactions now are meaningful in the molecular context.
Of course,
some of them can be
the
canceled
higher
out.
you go, typically,
So how charge cancels out?
right? Like, we're listening to
And we're
music, and the atoms are going one way or another. It doesn't matter. Like, shit, anything could happen there. I don't give a crap. The vibrations of sound are still gonna wash through.
That's one way to put it. Another way to put it is that, like I said, molecules don't cease to be atoms, but at the same time, some of the atomic fundamental interactions are maybe nullified. Charge being one of them. For example, color charge with quarks. You never see anything beyond white as far as color charge goes, but quarks come in yellow, blue, green, or magenta, RGB, so red, green, blue, or magenta, cyan, yellow, which is just
Is
color.
this like a metaphor, using color as a metaphor?
Yeah.
There's not actually these wavelengths
Right.
of nanometer.
No, there's no connection to photons.
Right.
So this is a metaphorical charge. The difference between positive and negative is that it's a triad. It's got three charges. To make a neutral, a white, you have to combine either the positives or the negatives with the colors.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate,
Color analogy.
yes. So at any rate, quantum mechanics stipulate that there are three charges, but atomic nuclear physics work with white.
So in theory, there's other stuff, but this is
They're not relevant to this language because they're always coming in a threesome, and they're always cancelled. Likewise with most molecules, unless they're ions, you're not talking about their charge. You're talking about their chemical composition.
Aside from the complexity or obscurity of the models you're talking about, what it seems like you brought up is that there's a whole bunch of different potential at every layer in all cases, but we're often only concerned with certain subsets based on what seems
is
to
relevant,
be
contextual or contextual.
Relevant.
And this is the same case I'm making for slowing down the expression of symbols into a certain set, say 26 of them, so that you're not overburdened on this
Good
layer,
idea.
and that's the only focus you have. Now you formulate your sounds from
What about the
those.
Chinese set, pictograph?
It's a different approach. It's
Right.
similar in nature, but it has a different.
And it still works, doesn't it?
It's more metaphorical.
Where
actually.
do you
It's
base
closer,
your argument?
It's closer to what I'm
for
describing.
26.
Look, I'm not.
They've got thousands. They're fine.
It's one way to do it.
Oh, okay. It wasn't like a moral.
No.
Like that's too much to think.
No. Theirs is closer to what I'm describing in terms of actual replication of the idea.
Itself.
Yeah, because
Each one representing, yeah.
they're not
A
just
symbol. Each one is a symbol.
They're not just like letters. They're also
It's
pictures. They're also words. They're also metaphors, and there are a whole bunch of other things. So when you're describing something in those languages, you're actually like not just even using direct language. You're using a combination of different other
You're
known
like just
metaphors.
evoking symbols within the brain one after another, and it paints a picture up. Instead of which you do with words too, but you phoneticize each one, and then that becomes a symbol. So
It takes
the
more
word
work.
there, the word hat, HAT, like it still is a symbol. In the same way that Chinese would have a thing for whatever hat.
And
looks like,
we're
whatever
amateurs. First of all,
strokes.
we're amateurs. We don't know Chinese.
But we can assume that they're referencing symbols.
And we can also
reference
assume
symbols
that
too.
it takes us a lot longer to process those kinds of imagery than it would in that language, because we not only need to construct the
This cultural.
construct the picture. We need to construct the picture, then apply the metaphor. They're given the picture. They only need to metaphorize past that point. So we have more steps involved by moving the language away from the mimetic style.
I guess I was kind of naively sort of equating let's say one Chinese symbol with one English word, even though they're like the word could be like hiking. And in Chinese, it could be a thing where it's like, okay, that evokes the symbol in your mind of what hiking generally is itself, in and of itself. So does the word hiking in English, because that evokes the symbol of, okay, what is hiking in of itself? When you see that one word, these are two things pointing to the same symbol in your brain, isn't it? There's one like locus of connection when you see the word hiking. Right? There's only one, it pops up.
Well,
anything can evoke that in different contexts.
What's the difference between hiking factory or hiking a beach?
Or you don't hike in a factory.
You go to work in a factory. You go on vacation in a beach. I'm just trying to illustrate how hiking, taking a trip.
Factory, beach, working, vacation, those are all just other symbols, which there's a Chinese symbol for it. There's also a English
Forget Chinese.
set of...
We don't know Chinese. Let's not make
I'm
any
sure they have it.
Yeah,
but we also have it as a that
I just don't want to appropriate the wrong thing here.
Yeah, we're not experts on this.
The point being is not
actually,
that we know.
I'll tell you my source, because I was listening to the audiobook of I Am a Strange Loop. So
that's fair.
It's a bit fresh in my mind with like this exact thing.
Yeah, but the illustration I was trying to say is like you can paint hiking in two different lights. One of them, if you associate it with a factory, you're picturing going to work. If you associate it with the beach, you're picturing going to relax.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. Yeah.
Just we would have to imagine what is it like. Okay, hiking in the context of a factory. That means you're going to work.
Could potentially.
Possibly.
It could be your tour in the factory to find a job. It could mean, depending
Right.
on what hiking even means. Does hiking mean intentional
Right.
or unintentional exploration?
But importantly, I think I didn't give the context. I just said the word hiking, and that's what I meant by symbol. I think, and what I tried picking up off Hofstadter,
no,
what the symbol is. When he was saying like, there's many symbols in your brain. It's like, and then he would just give fucking the list of a microwave, a dog, a bone, like the words, and it's like these all pull up different. Each one of these symbols pulls up for you your own unique, what is a symbol meaning.
Archetype.
And this is kind of like, yeah, like your central reference point for each experience you have involving that could shape what that is, but you memorize it to that thing. You categorize it in the moment of something like, oh, this is a table, that's a laptop. One time my laptop exploded or something, so that changes what laptops are for you over time, right? Like things happen.
My battery went beyond its physical capacity
Right.
of being
You
contained.
learn, they get shaped. But that's what I tried pointing to as when I said symbol.
So we have another term, sign. Symbol and sign. You've heard this delineation before?
Yes.
We have our own.
I'll admit I often get confused as to like
So a sign is
how
when
to-
is when a
what
symbol.
people mean when they say it, or what the context
That's actually very
is.
it's
Like,
very connected. A sign is very much when the meaning of a symbol and its context has been selected already.
so it's a reified symbol.
Yeah, so it's like it no longer means
Sign
this or that or
feels
the other. It
mythological
means that.
that way.
Yeah.
It's a sign.
So it's top down. It's the top down.
Right.
So the symbol never changes, but what the sign it represents is
Sure.
within the myth.
Okay.
Does.
Sign that points
And that's
to,
context,
that points
and
to
that's
meaning.
contextual.
Like, what is the meaning of this when a set of symbols present to your experience, right?
Right. And if you were to go way back, the artifacts in the next layer are entirely sign. So you have symbols underneath, signs
Right.
on top. Same symbol, different artifact, different sign. So you don't get repetition of symbols up top in the artifacts because they're all constituents of the same sign, of different signs now. Same symbol, different sign for this artifact because this artifact means something different
Sure.
together, holistically.
Well, every artifact, it would be, you could say, as you experience it, as you're mapping it, composed of different pieces and parts
Right.
in that moment, in that context.
So those pieces and parts are signs, which means that they're unique to that artifact. But composition-wise, they're symbols, meaning they're like the same types
If you
of
want to
molecules.
break it apart, like saying, well,
So you only have
this
carbon.
laptop, the screen is light, that's like, there's a symbol it's on.
There's
kind of.
photons. There's light. There's carbons. You didn't see the underlying layers don't change. The symbolic layers don't change. So like you're still working through the same molecules, regardless of if it's a table or a human. You're working with the same photons, regardless if it's a light bulb or the sun. So that doesn't change. So the
Sure, okay.
symbols don't
You're
change.
talking like neurologically, what your senses are perceiving in.
I'm saying that on the higher layer, in each different context, the exact same signals are represented by different signs. So today red makes a stop sign, tomorrow red makes a Coca-Cola sign.
Mm-hmm.
That
Right.
sort of stuff.
And of course, the senses that we take in there's like thousands of data points per second or whatever. You could theorize like how much, how quick and how much data we take in, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of gets summarized through the process of neurology, neurochemistry, through this kind of higher level thinking of symbolic symbols, signs, artifacts.
It's the same reason why the Coca-Cola sign, it does not become the stop sign either. Those myths are kept apart, even though red came into being in both of them, so to speak. Like, I'm obviously being very rough here. But yeah, the associative jumps.
It's interesting.
They're very in flux. So now
we want to point to the a breakdown of the inner experience through the neurochemical operating system, like those kind of, we point to those charts and all that.
So we've built enough to have a topology finally, eh? We have the layers, and there's nothing to say that once you get to this layer, you can have another layer.
Let's draw it.
Another layer.
Let's do the NCOS chart topographically.
So,
it would have to be a contextual example or an idealized sample.
So if we take our stack, turn it top view, and imagine that each lower layer is slightly fatter.
Yeah, looking from up down.
Yeah, bird's eye view. You get the same image that you would get from a topographical map of a hill or a mountain or whatever. Extend that map a little bit and play around with the topology. You get mountains of different elevations at different rates.
I think one first observation would be that when you're looking down at this, it's like concentric spheres at this point.
Circles, yeah.
The NCOS layer is from top to bottom. You would have to see, like, even the middle layers and the medial layers are composed of what's on the outside. Like, they are within that outer definition. They're just slightly more specialized and more specialized linguistically.
So no matter where you're on the map, at least everything is quote unquote connected.
Right. Because at any time, we would say, like, whatever the middle sphere is, if you were to, like, pull it up, it would suck all of the bottom layers up into it. You know what I mean? Like, whatever it's composed to its core, like that, you should see a dot in the very middle, because that's like the bottom layer stretching up to the, you know what I mean? Like, right up there. But
I'm sorry,
I'm trying to visually.
Quite juvenile, aren't we?
Visually, you get the picture. Right? It's all contained within, and each circle has access to go down the layers to communicate with any other thing that's there.
Well, anything pressing up from the bottom is going to press up to the top, press up to the top, press up to the top. Anything pressing back down is going to, technically speaking, exert likewise pressure, unless you have a dissipation situation.
In practical or common terms, we're talking about like, let's say how molecules and tissues and organs make up my body, and all the way up through the brain neurology. But I can also scratch and destroy a bunch of cells and atoms and completely shift what just happened in this area of space-time.
On that very limited
so
layer.
Came
that
up,
doesn't even
but it also comes down, so it's coming up and down.
So what's interesting about something like scratching, though, because it's so quote-unquote insignificant to the overall picture, what comes back up doesn't actually register into anything.
I have a bit of remaining sensation of pain, which would kind of signal, or it felt good to scratch at the time, so that's kind of a thing, right?
I think what my point being is that the overall mythology of your being does not at all get shifted in any sense. Like, even though such chaos happened over there.
Yeah, I was just trying to point to there is a bit of feedback from the body too, right? But
there is, but not all of it matters. Now, say you need to take a shit.
Like, let's say there's a mosquito there, and you swat it away or smush it, or, right? That's a pretty instant thing. Yeah. And it may even hurt you to, like, slap or something, right?
But I think what I'm trying to get at is more like those kind of temporary hiccups, so to speak, bumping up from the body don't actually contribute to the ongoing mythology so much, unless they become chronic or part of your makeup in some sense.
Right.
So there's another disconnect that you can think of. So, in essence, what I'm saying is...
there's sensing, but there's like a summarization going on up the layers, I guess, like of significance. And we don't always properly assess what is significant or not below when we're looking at the layers below. Like, should I have really scratched that scab off or something? You know what I mean?
So, topographical map, we now have a nice big square.
Sure.
We got different elevations of mountains to represent different capacity, growth for capacity. You can reach this height, you can reach that height, you can reach this height. Those are all within the realm of possibilities within that space.
Okay. Like a little sandbox sculpture, something. We've got, let's say, 3 peaks, bit of a mountain range. They're sharing a common base.
Now we're going to start to depart slightly from the analogy,
Pardon?
but build upon it as we do so.
Okay.
We're going to speed up time ridiculously.
Okay, the mountain explodes.
No, the terrain starts to move up and
Oh,
down.
I thought the
and
sun
blah,
was
blah.
like just
Not-
engulfed everything.
No, we're not talking about that.
Sorry.
Obviously.
Not like hyper ridiculously.
Just ridiculously enough
Okay. My bad.
to make sense. Hopefully. So what we're interested...
We want to finish the intro here, by the way.
This
That's
is it. We want to give that picture of wobbling terrain, going up and down, mountains build up,
As to
layers
look
build,
out to the environment around us.
those concentric circles bubble up,
To
bubble
see
down,
this kind of thing.
and sort of paint the picture of like that being the animism.
The myth of animism. This was a long time ago we did that episode, but carry on.
And at the same time talk about myth, how it creates ontology through what we just did. This is the myth we were expressing. We were building the ontology of this picture. And now we're going to further the myth into like qualifying what constitutes this resonance wakes. Like, once peaks are at certain layers, what does it mean for them to send a protocol horizontally across the field?
Right, and there's protocol through membrane. That's the construction of
So-
it. Up and down, or down and up, if you will.
So if we remember, we built the stack up by isolating it from the outer environment. So the next layer will have to be inside the environment, isolated. The next one will have to be inside the environment, isolated, and so on and
Sure.
so forth. So it means that any signal from here will naturally be some kind of outburst on this layer, some kind of outburst on this layer, some
Right.
kind of outburst on this layer, some kind of on this layer. Could dissipate at any time going down.
Right. And typically this is like a lightning strike, like a synchronous event of all just happens at once, and you can break down what each layer is happening if you want.
And by dissipating, I mean it can be canceled out on the way. Like, for example, this layer can actually handle it, so the response just comes back up. It doesn't need to reach
Sure.
all the external layers.
Do you have a sticker on your sweater?
Yes, my my daughter loves to decorate.
Looking good.
So now we've established a push down mode from a peak. Likewise, is like if something is happening on this layer, it can ricochet into this layer, it can ricochet into this layer. However, it can dissipate.
Downloading and uploading, those are two terms,
Yeah,
by the way. One mentioned.
we've butchered them
appropriated.
before, to like no end.
Very useful, though.
So
It's kind of the idea of your relationship with the state, the model and the state kind of debate, like pushing upwards or downwards, whether you're uploading into the structure, the archetype, I guess, or downloading, which is the state pushing down onto the lower layers to just do its command kind of stuff. There's two directions of causality
Yeah.
in this schema.
So the downloading part will consist of, okay, you believe in such archetypes, here's their current structure, go.
Mm-hmm.
Sets you up for
Right.
an expression to
Yeah, that's not even somebody else. I like
to
how you
respond
describe
back.
that. It's not an external force or a government, but simply the mythology. Its function to take this context in. Well, this is your world. This is what's happening now. Boom, let's go.
Yeah, you already believe the world. You already believe the narrative that's being spoken. Respond back.
How do they simply connect through the protocol processing? Right?
Move the lower layers for
Yeah,
that.
it's pretty wild to think about a machine, if you will, that can take data in, sense
It's
all
pretty
that kind of
mechanical,
stuff.
doesn't it? It doesn't seem so.
There is a lot to be unpacked and understood about its this protocol idea. Just kind of
And we're not
shows
saying
that
it's
that
bad.
it's
Like
made
it's-
of parts, of little pieces. So we can all investigate little tiny pieces here and there and see, like, wow.
It's important to understand that we're not saying that this is bad. It's the way it's used that can be really bad. There's a big difference between
That's a typical
this
one.
being,
I
being
didn't-
necessity and it
Not
being
sure if I
over.
followed.
So it's like it's a necessity of life, but it's being overused. Like gluttony is a sin. And for example, like eating is necessary, overeating causes you health problems. It's that it's that non-difficult of a relationship to understand. Overdoing anything really is to take the middle point and move it to the extreme. Well, we've also iterated a number of times that the center is where shit happens. So
And what have we overdone?
Extremes are destructive.
Pardon. We've forgotten feedback. We reify.
Well, this new topology picture actually makes feedback inescapable. Any peak going down means some peak going up. Any peak going up.
So
means some
everything is
peaks
part
are
of a
going down.
continuity.
So it's the same membrane, so to speak, overall. There's a zero-sum game in some sense.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of a
being
continuity,
fed by an
continuity of
external force.
thought where everything is in a context, flowing, as opposed to kind of scattered.
Now, to be clear, it's not exactly zero-sum because there's the sun feeding energy into the whole mix. So we don't...
Praise be.
So there is energy conservation, but there is also the entropic principles involved. In the same
Alhamdulillah.
sense. So not only does the Earth, so to speak, erode on its own accord, there's variations given to it through other forces. So some being siphoned away, some being shot back into it. It doesn't necessarily balance out at every moment. It's
Of course. Mm-hmm.
absorb, dissipate, absorb, then dissipate, absorb, then dissipate. But always absorb, always dissipate. Lining them up is not as concrete as accounting.
Mm-hmm. I get you. So we can look at the history of nature through, whatever you want to call it, through history of stacking, of increasing complexity of through stacking.
Yeah.
And I forget what the point was, but yeah.
That's the mythology. That mythology is what's given us the stacking ontology. That
Right.
ontology describes what we call animism. Animism is that ontology plus all of the different communications going between peaks. So to illustrate how communications go between peaks, we have to have the metaphor of you press one down, dissipate some energy.
This is animism or beyond animism? To communicate between peaks? Sorry, I'm just trying to follow like the structure, and I felt like
So animism The communication between peaks is an energy exchange. So you press energy into the medium, it comes back out through others.
Mhm.
That's one analogy.
Yeah, I felt you were gonna bring up the Portal Mountain thing, where it's like you start at one peak and
Yeah, no,
transform to another.
that's farther along, way farther along. We're just trying to set up the actual ground
Mhm.
on which that can happen.
Just the mechanics, basic mechanics.
So the other thing to imagine is like not a physical pushing down on the ground, but imagining these things as batteries and antennas. So the absorptions that they get
Mhm.
don't necessarily change their shape immediately in any way, but they may have another battery to
almost
absorb
just
some
like-
energy, extra energy, without physically
almost like
expanding.
everything everywhere can potentially send or receive stuff.
From, well, that goes right back down to the point of view.
Do you know what I like when I make such a broad statement?
Yes.
That's what it seems like, and this is the potentiality or the potential.
I'm trying to quantify it as we speak. So how do you know there's a photon or an electron?
Somebody shut the door down there or something? Or
Don't think so.
thought I heard something slam. Oh, there's just the neighbors.
So yeah, like how do you know a photon is there or an electron is there? You smash something else into it. So that means you don't know if there's anything anywhere except by its effects on something else. It goes right back to that idea.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that makes reifying very troublesome. But anyways, with that, we shall be right back. Are we so back?
All right. So, as I was saying,
Right. Higher layers, more complex, more mimicry needed,
yeah, because
more
it's
dumbness.
because
in
it
other
because
words.
it becomes like the only system that can actually
stupidity.
keep up with the energy expenditures that are necessary.
Right. It's like a shortcutting, simplification. That's a kind of a purpose of myth.
And it's
And
also
tradition and all these things is like the shortcut.
it's a survival of the fittest.
What works.
Replication
right?
is the most fit mechanism.
And that's the huge danger, of course, because these myths need to be taken up in feedback as provisionally as a model.
I had a greater point there.
I hope if it's greater than that,
So no, what
I'll be impressed.
okay. Well, we had our topology map, right? And we're talking about having different peaks and mountains and all of that rising out of it. The higher you see mountains, the higher the mountains are, the more chances there are of some kind of replication going across their constituent layers.
Of course.
Whether it be direct
Yeah.
replication as an ancestry,
So it's just a fact of,
or convergent evolution.
but it's a fact of complexity. These languages, symbols, symbol clusters.
Condense into the possibilities that are most likely. Yeah, so it's so with that in mind, what do you see with your mountain peaks if not a bunch of self-replicated mountain peaks with variations?
Right.
So
You're always going to see these kind of spikes, but that look the same type of spike here and there, intermixed with different all kinds of other types of spikes. Other words, objects, different types of objects.
So we've set up an objective ontology so far. Now we're leaving room for a subjective one. So this fact of replication, direct or indirect, mimicry in general, means that higher enough layers, one subject can meld into a base of a different mountain peak. So with language, we see that a story can be told in English, French, Russian, and whatnot. The lower layers are all different. They land on different layers, but the story is the same. So the myth is the same. And if we're talking about mythology being one of the layers, we're starting to see how there is this window in which you can find yourself on one peak,
Okay, right.
drop down below, and find yourself on a different peak.
And you're representing this as, like, say, different cultures with different languages, telling the same essential story, teaching the same essential kind of moral, and coming to a base of understanding from which things can further be built. But it is shared, even though the stacks were different.
The peaks are the same, but the stacks are different. So you find yourself on a different mountain, but in the same village.
Kind of like
Somehow.
twisting up into a same thing. So you have pillars almost coming up to connect.
Yeah, and also the reverse is of course going to be true as well. Just don't know if we need to get
Just
into
just visually.
seeing that. Yeah. So this is so building up on, yes, there are layers. Why there are layers?
It's really it's analogically visual.
What layers
The visual
mean.
representations are just analogical, right?
And then all of it is moving up and down anytime you, and that's the energy exchange stuff. Maybe not moving down physically, so maybe some physical layers don't have a shift, but the mental ones do. You have more energy
Right.
today than you had yesterday.
I'd like
kind
to
of thing.
imagine receiving a paycheck into your bank account.
All of a sudden, there's way more
suddenly,
potential.
It's there and then starts flowing out, and this like wave just goes into different parts of your life.
Right. Exactly. The same idea. This is why sometimes I want to jump from a mountain being pushed down to an idea of an antenna and a battery, of like accumulating without shifting in size, and then dissipating without shifting in size. But on the overall scheme, if you were to like include all of those layers together, you push and pull, and then the capacity is how far you can build up the potential, and then it bottoms out. It's overflowing. Usually that means you start dissipating at that point. right? The overflow.
When inputs, this idea of flow in is like an input coming in. When inputs come in and you have enough inputs to satisfy the protocol, I guess, then the output becomes positive.
So the cheap example, the concrete cheap example is the pep talk. You can do this! And you get all like energized by just like words flowing into you and the ideas that you're forming through them. I say cheap.
Yeah.
I did say cheap. But it's easy to visualize, right?
I did enjoy that.
It's easy to visualize, as trivial as it is. Because it's trivial, it's easy. Like, you get pumped up by those words, then all of a sudden your maybe slightly more depressive mood has been elevated to past depression.
I think we could look at this maybe as a transfer of energy.
That's
in a you could probably look at it in a like literal economic sense of actual energy flowing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's been the analogy the whole time.
Because we're not separate from energy and physics and all that, right?
Yeah.
So follow the energy.
But it is important to understand that it's more of an analogy to the concept of energy and physics.
My car, when I put gas into the tank, now suddenly it's ready to, that object is doing all kinds of shit.
Right.
Right? If I stop doing that, then that's just too bad. It has the potential.
Well, information, same
right?
shit.
But there's not the inflow. There's no the inflow, and this is the real life kind of connection that I was referring to initially.
Information.
Is that we should think of the models as applying to our living experience of life all around us, not as a dead thing. So the car has to keep being fed in a way. That's its existence is a motion of and processes and connection. A protocol. There's a protocol at the gas pump, basically.
Yeah.
When the light comes on, go to the gas pump.
I still think that being fed information is more readily available as an experience. Like the pep talk, being pumped up for emotionally.
Sure, but I just want to say it's everywhere.
With positive mythology. So, but think about it. Positive mythology with regards to the activity gives the activity more of a satisfactory, if you will, outcome.
It's relevant
dopamine-wise.
I feel
so there's like a certain exchange of actual energy.
A pep talk should convey and solidify myth or strengthen.
I'm talking about a successful one and best case scenarios, of course. There's a pep talk.
You can do this. The reality is that you are the man. You know, like you're the professional, etc.
Look, man, some people's
woman.
Some people's idea of a pep talk is like, "Don't you fucking fail again."
Right.
That's probably going to diminish the energetic level of the output. So like where the absorption is. So the person
it's a
could
system.
be
You're putting into a system.
So check this out. The person doing the pep talk is outputting a lot of energy into like, don't fucking fail me one more time. But the person absorbing the energy is like absorbing it into a completely different reservoir than the intended. It only feeds the negative responses.
Right.
Try raising children.
Yeah, and this is a contrast between, I guess, management strategies, you could say, whether it's sort of top down. This would be like the patriarchal thing, like, you know,
do as I say, yeah.
Yeah, just command top down, rather than a lifting up, and encouraging, a bolstering, a building.
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning yet again why in our mythology you have male on top versus female on the bottom, which has more to do with the mythological element of Portal Mountain's description of the two roles, specifically one pertaining to chaos and order.
Right. Order chaos, order top, chaos.
Wherein chaos is effectively natural, sort of spoken nature, whereas the male counterpart is an offshoot that does its own. It's a very what do you call it? Joseph Campbell sort of reiteration based, where you have
Nice recall.
like your body, metaphorically speaking, and then you have your exploration of the outer environment coming back to the body, teaching it of the environment better, and grows it reflectively.
Interesting,
So we're not at the same time, we're not saying that your genitals define which part you play. We're talking about just like the human experience as a whole, with that aspect of it generally calling it the feminine element, which everybody experiences. That is the inherent tribal cohesion everybody already senses. The venturing out, the whole gathering of the outside world to bring back in, to
Hero's journey.
said
Feels.
nature, and to enhance it, and so to speak, we're calling masculine. But again, that doesn't pertain to your body type or identification or any of that stuff. It's just a journey element. And it's worth mentioning that it's not
Interesting. I never thought about this, but the hero's
composition
journey
of everybody.
through its bottom maybe is a kind of masculine thing to meet the feminine and come back.
To complete the
We've
picture,
told
everybody,
stories like that, I feel like, in years ago.
in a sense, anybody who undertakes the hero's journey starts off, quote unquote, very big quote unquote, male, the seeking outwards, right?
Some curiosity is sparked.
The challenge and the fall or rise or whatever is the feminine element, and then coming back around, you have the full rounded picture. So seeking hardship is male and is passive. Doing
Surprised.
hardship is female and is active.
It's not more well known.
So
Joseph Campbell or
in-
Hero's Journey.
in every aspect, it is in the feminine that you have everything reconciling back together. So even in our mythology, it doesn't juxtaposes the male above the female. It's just that it doesn't mean anything to the slayer. It's the mythology coming right back to its ontology.
This is the strange loop reconciliation, creating the isomorphism, seeking and finding the isomorphism between the masculine and the feminine.
Well, the real story here is that it's the myth adopting the ontology and the ontology being the myth. So the myth springs out from the ontological, but the ontological is built by the myth, comes back to it.
Okay, you're talking about an isomorphism between expressions.
And from this picture,
and
another
even
birth.
across layers, there's a meaning connection.
Yeah, it's more like about birth and death than it is about your set of genitals. It's really worth mentioning. So the ontology isn't born in a vacuum. It's driven by the mythology. But to get to that mythology, you have to spring out from the ontology,
I was reminded
learn
of-
about the environment, and feed back into the ontology, so that its
The
inner
cycle
environment is
is
reflective of the
grand-
outer environment.
A grand cycle of experience of life.
So the hero's journey is characterized from the female to male back to female. But what it's talking about is from ontology to mythology to ontology. And that one archetype represents the first versus the second isn't a sexist statement. It's more like body versus mind, or like, and those are the images, those are the symbols we can work with. And and that mythology feeds back into our cultural life. that's the caricatures of our quote unquote traditional roles. I don't know if you had the experience of watching children grow as much as I had, but there are characteristic differences between how, say, my daughter socialized with versus how my son's socialized. So those are not definitive markers or anything like that, but those are the underlying expression as to why we're gravitated to making the myth the way it rolls. You see the networking between women being more solid emotionally.
That's
You don't have the same thing with men. Men mostly rely on their significant partners for their emotional support, whereas women rely both
getting
on
to
them
something very
and their
interesting,
friends.
like biologically, if a species were to separate from being asexual into whatever you call it,
Trisexual.
yes,
Try anything.
Through its early history of that organism, if you want to call it that, it would like bifurcate into like, there would be reasons, like you could tease out the reason, like the mind could try to figure out the layers and tease out the reasons of why one sex is different from the other sex, right? Like there's some
So to make this picture even
like
more complicated,
it's practical. There's so many layers on which you could analyze it, right?
like if we compare ourselves to our closest ape relatives, gorillas, chimps, bonobos, we find that humanity does 1, 2, and 3 depending on how it feels. Like it's adopting the natural ways of doing things.
What's 1, 2, and 3?
So with gorillas, you have a single male and a harem of females. They also have the smallest penises and the smallest testicles known to the ape world, relative to their body size.
Because it doesn't matter. They just beat the shit out of anything and do whatever.
Chimps.
I think I'm throwing flavor on it because I think I've heard some of this before.
Chimps are patriarchal. So generally, males will aggressively dominate females, and also try to deflect rivalries, like keep them away.
Sure.
On the other hand,
Create a hierarchy.
they're promiscuous as fuck. So what they do is they sneak around whatever their dominant partners are, and they do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So
and can get in trouble and all that.
So those guys
Get
have
beaten.
the biggest balls possible for their body size in
To do lots of stuff.
in our brethren circle.
Get lots of business done.
Basically, like, it's the size of the balls that really matters, not the social hierarchy. It doesn't matter for the gorillas because in the social hierarchy it's so severe that you'd never get to that female to begin with. It's very, very rare that anybody
Just
has a
like
chance to.
insane beast will split you
Fucking
in half.
kill you, yeah. They do the same with chimps, but they sneak around as fuck. Then you have the bonobos. They're matriarchal, meaning female-led in general. They're alphas of the tribes, tend to be all female. These guys look like chimps, are far more relaxed, like in general, and all they do is fuck. They solve all of their social problems. They're just like, you know what? Let's just do a little bit of hanky
Let's feel
panky,
good.
and we're good.
Instead of feeling bad,
Yeah.
I've got an idea.
So,
Right.
and
Nature. That's kind of interesting.
long story short,
I don't know what to extrapolate.
humans
from that,
have
but
all of those societies. Humans have every single one of those examples in play.
sure within.
There's a tribe.
There's no single culture.
I don't know
or
about a
anything like
tribe,
that.
but it's a culture in Tibet, somewhere near there, if I'm wrong. That's matriarchal in that sense, and that's where women have multiple husbands, and that's just their family life. Then you have all of this bravado machismo bullshit that you get from East and West at the same time. Men rule, women submit, the gorillas. And then you have the chimps, which is basically like, I'm a tough guy, but shit happens. We have like literally every single example of those cultures. Point being, we're generalists. We're not like tied.
Capable of lots.
We're not like tied down to any one framework. This, that, frame. We will actually use all of them.
That's what the APS does.
Allows. The next
It's
layer
a
of
complete
it, if you will.
abstraction of what reality is, what it's composed of.
So we've abstracted the chimp myth, the gorilla myth, and the bonobo myth into our own human myth, and it's a fucking clusterfuck. And it's contradictory. And it's incomplete. And it's all of those things. Because like I just used 3 examples. There's more. There's
The
variations on the fucking
common ones.
There's variations on these themes too. It's not like everybody has to be either in an orgy or completely secluded, right? It's like
A nun.
or yeah, like that. It's an interesting point though.
Did we finish the intro yet, by the way? I'm just wondering if we ever concluded like
All right.
the ontology, like how's ontology constructed?
So
got
we-
layers,
we
topology.
we were describing our myth to describe the ontology. We've gotten to the point of where we have mountains,
Yep.
antennas, and batteries, so to speak. Like to
Yeah,
give a physical versus a non-physical
It's a bit
idea.
technological, but sure, you've got a mountain.
Idea of energy
Some
accumulation.
peaks. Maybe they're actually antennas instead of peaks, or maybe it's made of antenna instead of rock.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just a bunch of antennas attached to each other.
What we need to understand is potential. Potential can also be in the weight of the mountain, or the
Sure.
energy stored into said peaks.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because it seems like
It's an
obvious
arbitrary.
that,
It's an arbitrary delineation, by the way.
if a bear wants to hibernate and it's fat as fuck, let's say, that's good. That capacity is there, right? So that's the weight of the mountain is sufficient to cause things.
Both analogies
To
are
happen.
basically valid. The pressure of the mountain going down is probably sufficient enough heat for it to hibernate under.
There you go.
There's an example of both situations at play. So if we want to complete the picture of this mythology, we have to come back to animism. Those peaks are what's animated, and all peaks shoot messages.
By
at each
animated,
other.
you mean should be viewed as alive?
Yeah, like speed up the time of the topographical map, and you're seeing waves,
Okay.
essentially.
Just inexplicable, not dead matter.
In
but
movement.
something is happening.
In motion. right?
Nature.
Yeah, so if you picture that in motion, then all you're seeing is this antennas shooting energy at each other at different layers, accumulating as much as they can and then shooting back.
Mhm.
And it doesn't really logically align what gets absorbed and what gets sped back up. And we've established that through there's no quantitative way to allow for qualitative jumps as we have between layers. So
To understand where it came from, why
Like
it's
logically
why it's
speaking.
said this way.
yeah, like logically speaking, we don't have that window unless we're acutely aware of a specific transmission pattern or something.
Hmm.
I mean, we can do that, but it's not like itself going to be an exact science either. So ultimately, the full mythology of the ontology is that there's animism. There are these stacks. There's stacks of potential energy. Potential actualizes
Mhm.
horizontally,
Stacks don't exist in your mind mentally. Stacks, as we're talking about, are part of the whole of the system and all its capacities and everything.
Yeah.
The environment, the world all around us, can be seen as outlined in these kind of structures.
Whatever protocol you're using, it's already going to handle the stacking.
Like, let's say a gold bar, right, has a lot of potential on, let's say, market to do things. Push that gold bar out, you can do so much in the world, you could say, based on the system as it's set up.
As a battery.
The monetary system, sure.
It's,
right.
it's a battery.
Yeah.
For the monetary system, of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect this mental idea with, like, okay, this is a literal gold brick in your hand. Go do things.
Or
right?
or with a battery. Oh, I've got there's so many ions on one side versus the
Sure.
other.
You bring a battery camping, you can charge your phone or play music. All you want.
Exactly. But at the same time, music does not mean anything to the battery. Versus it being a light bulb, a flashlight, or something
Sure,
else.
yeah. You're talking about, you're referencing again these significant layers, the epiphenomenon, composing even more epiphenomenon, all these higher meanings of things, which are dependent on that being a part of it, right? Like you need, say, a music file,
Mm-hmm.
and the battery itself,
So you notice how there's
and the
this
speaker.
So you notice how there's this incidental quality to everything? That's the moment.
And I didn't, but we
So,
mean
so,
incidental.
so you were saying for it to mean something, it has to be this and that and this and that and
Yeah.
this. So you're putting
Like the
together.
fact of it
You're putting
itself
together
doesn't mean
elements.
anything.
Elements coming out of a dream into
Right.
one single moment. That gave you meaning. That's what it is.
Right.
To feed back into the next moment because it was this and that. How
Right.
did you know it was this
Mhm.
and that and that from the other moments? And that keeps feeding back into itself. So that's the dream feeding into the moment, feeding back into the dream, feeding
You
back
were
into the
hearing
moment.
music, everything was playing, all the pieces came together.
Sure. That too.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand your question, but threw an image out there. And
I was trying
I think
to.
we're pointing to the composability of
I'm trying to.
objects at layers, and we were trying to re-summarize or cap off the intro to this.
What I'm saying is, in order to get to a point of meaning, you had to draw on a composite number of elements.
Context.
Those composite number of elements is what the dream is. That ontology, with that mythology, playing itself out. Now, what constitutes the moment is the putting together this piece of ontology, that piece of ontology, this piece of ontology under that piece of mythology.
Okay.
That gives it the next outcome.
Yeah. Okay, so
So
sorry,
that
you
gets
almost
fed.
lost me there, but you're saying like ontology, or wait, the dream is being composed at the same time of dream particles of mythology and ontology.
Get fed into this processor of the moment,
Right.
constitute what actually is happening in the ontology given the mythology, which creates the
Right.
next picture, fed
Mhm.
back into the
It's
dream,
a,
and now the dream is wider.
this is the small chart.
And the big chart,
I think
yeah.
it's in the small chart, I think.
Yeah, it
gotta
is
be.
the same picture. Big chart into small chart, back out into big chart.
Hmm. Yeah, just that during our perception over time, our experience of perception over time, there's this process of feedback which includes not only a top-down view or mythology of like what's the reality of what's happening, what is this, what is that, is this that, but there's also the flip side of it, like I was gonna say quantification side of it,
Yeah,
But-
that shit coming together.
but there's the two.
This with that with this.
There's the upper and the lower, just like a zipper.
So the upper gives you the this, the that, the other. The lower gives you, oh, okay, how does that combine to make the next this, that, and the other?
Right. So breaking it down into an ongoing process involving a stitching together of an upper and a lower, if you will. Could be said like it's very common, I guess, for me to think of these models in static terms, but almost everything that we end up discussing should be really related to like the ongoing, like a zippering effect of like the upper and lower just through time.
Feedback,
yeah. You're supposed to be able to see it happening at any moment.
And the end result becomes the feedback for the next result to become the feedback for the next result, which means that you can't just like step out of the cycle and be like, where does it all begin?
To point at it, yep, that cycle is happening, that there's a feedback. We always have a model in mind which continuously takes in, okay, what's the next thing happening in front of me? Even in my mind, even the model itself can feed back into the next thing, the content of the next cycle.
And to answer the question, where does it all begin? That's where we have the whole idea of bootstrapping. It's where you have an extrinsic force acting on a layer, putting it all together such that it jumpstarts into self-referential feedback, as we were describing.
Mm-hmm. The provisional.
The very main example of that is just like sperm meets egg kind of a thing. Starts from the cellular world. Everything gets built up from the cellular compound, guided by the external environment, which is the full organism, right? Like being in the womb or the egg or whatever. There's an external organism that actually sets the boundaries for how this process can go.
Part for me here that we're using an analogy of biology, which seems very well settled, like science, and mental models and maps.
Same with what you...
Which can be very vague.
So how you speak. English is not a language invented by your brain. It was fed to you externally by your environment, and then you reutilize this mechanism to express needs. Over time, it became second nature, and you don't need to think about it, and it's just like need, meet action, need, meet word, need, meet, I need to go over here.
Okay, I follow, but I'm reminded again to like, how do we recap this intro that we're doing? Can we, I don't know if I'm on the same page of...
We tried to create an ontology.
We tried to technically explain what the ontology is of mythology. How is mythology created? What's the ontology side of it? Via like protocol, and like inputs and outputs, membranes, stacking, layering. Like, what is the structure of reality around us? What is a structure model that we can utilize to map anything?
2 weeks ago, we described what constitutes a mythology, the narrative, the whole thing. We also touched base on that it gets formulated upwards from building up signals to building up words to building up paragraphs to building up stories to building up full-blown encompassing stories.
A book.
In this case, we went like, okay, and we have a story that's going to create an ontology. So we're going back down.
Is that yours, or?
Yeah, that's yours over there, behind the bag.
No, this one.
Oh yeah, this is also mine.
Then pardon me.
And today, what we've done is we've laid down how our mythology gives us a membrane, gives us an enclosed membrane.
Right.
An enclosed membrane gives us agency. That agency gives us another layer, and a stepping stone forward to making another layer on top of that. Because it's an inner environment, it can be treated as an outer environment in its own context. The process can repeat and continue, and you can build up a stack as you keep going along. Blah 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 blah
right.
blah blah.
You can just do the same thing to build up these
we then take
mountains.
We then took a singular mountain and said the more the higher the mountains are, the more likely mimicry to be behind their existence, because that's the most efficient way to conserve energy and be complex. That's the complex adaptive system idea.
It's too much to explain,
So
basically, which is weird.
We've established this sort of playing field of self-same replicated mountains.
But the elders are supposed to know this, quote unquote, let's say.
Whatever the fuck that would mean.
You know what I'm pointing at, though.
Truth.
Like, ideally,
Quote.
the elders, or the oldest, should be able to break down those myths, taken reified ways, and be able to explain to somebody why it's used.
So as far as I'm concerned, an elder is anybody who will take this picture and say, this is what you need to look at in your mind to understand animism. Animism is that picture with the slight modification of, if you look at different layers, the higher the layer is, the more it's capable of shooting quote-unquote messages, resonance, into any other peak.
Yeah, it's like by definition more powerful. Because by a single switch up high, you're necessitating a whole bunch of layer movements in their symbolic signal processing to shoot at signals at every layer. Just those by layers are tiny switches up top.
Dude, those layers are even more clever than that. What they can do is they can set it up, because they can send signals back down the layers, they can set up a mechanism down a layer such that if it receives some basic signals, it sends it more elaborate things back up the network. So it's like your nervous system
technologically paying attention to a lower layer.
It's like damage here causes pain here. So you have a
more basic biologic.
So you have layers sending signals up their layers, being set up by layers sending down layers, and there's like this, and it's all growing in tandem.
Yeah.
It's not just growing one versus the other. It's not a competition.
Refer to this, I think, through isomorphism as a general concept to describe what it means that layers can kind of hear each other. Want me to pause? Thank you. Layers to resonate with each other, if you will, which is something of like a stack, like a body's cells, organs, neurology. You know, these things, they have to be in some kind of coherence, obviously. They have to be focused on themselves, otherwise the whole thing blows apart, right?
Right. What's the point of creating a smart mind for one's body if the body doesn't get to live to enjoy smart mind?
Super smart. Spent all its time thinking about smart things and then died. And then ceased to be able to do so.
Right.
The body receded.
The entire goal schemata there seems off base. But that's almost beside the point.
We bring up isomorphism as the term to fill that.
But the real term I want to get really honed in at is the mythology of animism. And so if we take on these peaks, we accelerate them through time, going up and down based on their own pressures, having those antennas and batteries to ricochet signals off each other in the meantime.
Like the world around us. Bears get fat, this and that, yes.
To picture every single quote-unquote thing as such, stack, that's the world view, if you will. That's animism. That's like the not the belief, but the sight of, like the very recognition of.
What I'm getting from that is this animistic view.
So from table to
this animistic
human
view must look at the most complex things it sees in its environment and see a commonality through all of it. Right?
Why most complex?
That it's all as
like table.
No, I mean like a bear. another animal, a car, whatever.
Sure,
Like,
nature presents
we're
the more
all,
obvious objects. I get that.
That it can be, the meaning of that thing out there can be broken down to something in common, like common media. Like,
also-
there's a reason, there's common reasoning.
So
for-
not just natural objects like animals and rocks and all of that, but engineered objects. They're also stacks. They have a different
Right.
starting point. But they are also leaning into the same layers.
You don't want to,
So machines are a different breed of that kind of stuff.
you don't want to reify like a plateau, like as in a real, like a solid mountain or something like that. But the things that I depend on for having shoes and what a car has tires, but we're still walking on land, like that. This environment has nice flat land everywhere.
Both need rubber.
And we both.
And check it out, rubber does not exist in nature. Rubber has to be developed into a factory, put back
Well,
into
you
the
could- you don't need-
into the environment, so
Ain't
that you
nobody
can create
need shoes.
and tires.
You could have crazy metal tires too, making racket. But that was my point, was that whatever you're looking at in the moment, in your environment, say a car or a person walking, that the context of that object is it's sitting on a common layer of meaning, a common media, that flat ground, right? And that's like what these mountains are based in, those kind of shared media. But it's all mixed media and overlapping media.
This is why I'm saying, like, an antenna on a peak of a mountain is technically sending signals to like layer to itself, layer above itself, layers below itself, and to set up an antenna to shoot messages to above itself, the above portion has to like shoot messages,
Have a button.
shoot messages to the
This is
below
like
layers
dashboard.
to create those signals. So it's like
Dashboard
us
stuff.
creating a radio, so that electrons can transmit signals for us across space.
Sure.
Like we dove
But
back
for a
into
specific
a layer.
purpose. And I
Yeah.
was thinking of dashboards and buttons.
It's the same thing. We reorganized that layer from above.
That's how we've
conceptually.
been kind of looking at the layers, how to communicate between, say, hold-ons on different layers or whatever.
Well,
Through
one
dashboards.
of the very first things I said is that in order to communicate from layer to layer, you have to download across the bottom layers. So no matter which way you're sending your signal,
To a separate,
going to
separate
be-
hold-on.
it's actually going to be going down lower.
Would you say that? Separate hold-on. To a, like a pier. A
Yeah,
pier,
yeah, yeah.
pier hold-on. A hold-on pier, let's call it.
Yeah, you have to use the medium in between the peering.
It goes down all the way and then back up. So, like,
One second.
if I want to walk to a car,
One second.
use the same road. Pardon for the interruption. A phone call. Oh, somebody showed up. Who's SP? Are we network engineers? We are network engineers. I don't know if they're still here. Let's see. Oh, we had a couple. We had 3 people watching. We must have been, and some of them sustained too. We must have been pretty entertaining tonight, I guess. Still, I think somebody's on. No? Yes, no, chat.
We're not as neglectful as we seem to be. We are simply not.
There was a comment though. We always get distracted.
We're
Are
not
you two
adept.
network engineers attempting to map the psyche? 'Cause
Sure.
That's good, man.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah, and you've got a networker and a programmer
Why not?
attempting to map the psyche.
Networker works with wood.
We're stealing that SP. That's our tagline. That's our new tagline.
In some ways, it's not incorrect. Like,
map the psyche. Sure, yeah. You
The
gotta
way-
go
the way-
inward to
so-
understand what the world is about. We have to know who we are.
Do you remember how
in
I
order to
described
do that.
Buddhism? Do you remember how I described Buddhism and why my initial attraction wound up being it?
The what?
So with Buddhism,
Initial what?
why I got interested in this whole topic was Buddhism,
Mhm.
and why Buddhism was it. It has very much to do with
Right.
that question. I saw in Buddhism an attempt to create a software program representative of the mind
Right.
without any knowledge of computers or electronics or anything to that effect. The
Even
outcome
before knowing that, so you felt you had some insights, and things made a lot of sense when it clicks.
that way,
of looking
specifically that way.
at the canon.
So it's full of poetry. It's full of what you would call contradictory prose, which is another reason why I'm
Mhm.
not too sold on prose.
Right. It's inevitable, maybe.
But ultimately speaking, programming seemed to be the correct way to orient oneself. It was talking about things like how the folder on your screen, when you double click it, is not a real folder, it's just a representation of a folder. and that kind of rhetoric, except poetic and much more spiritual, if you will.
Sure. And what was that? That you were
Buddhism.
What content?
So Buddhism.
Specific
The Theravada canon, the
wings or.
Wings of Awakening
I was trying to think
clarified the points.
where this folder on your computer metaphor came
Oh,
from, as a kind of
just as a one-off,
just
just from my mind. Yeah,
Right.
like how
Okay.
on the screen you see a folder, but in reality the computer is creating a bunch of pixels for you that it doesn't care about, and that's the kind of rhetoric Buddhist poetry essentially expressed. So when it was talking about delusion,
It's like,
it wasn't talking about you're stupid and
It's
you're
a symbol
insane.
on a different layer, on a more significant layer that has more meaning to you.
Right.
You don't care that it's
And if you expect it.
in a hard drive which holds a series of ones and zeros
Right.
from
So
1 to a billion or whatever.
So the screen being a metaphor for your computer's content was a very apt analogy for what the Buddha was trying to express the mind is doing. So there are no twigs or trees or snow or whatever. There are these little operating system pixels that rush across your mind that you latch onto or not. And the proposition he created is that you have a choice. You latch onto the set of pixels, whether they be representative of environment or not, besides the point. Do you latch onto them or do you not? Do you have the control over it? AKA, are you the master of the operating system that presents the icons onto the screen, or are you subject to a different entity
In
that
other words,
presents
the
the icons?
the problem of reification. Are you subject to it, or is it one possibility of many other possibility things?
This also drives my connotation towards maturity. Maturity to me is essentially like, if childhood is when the parents feed you what the icon set is, maturity is taking that on and iterating over it and over it and expressing it into
through
your
feedback
own.
based on your own experience, direct experience,
Right.
and learning, sensing and learning from the world.
So where are those?
Maturity, sure.
So where are those tuggings come from? Yourself or others? So maturity is to not be tugged by others,
Typically,
but allow
the
tugs
charlatan
to be.
is not interested in your own personal journey, if you will. That's
Right,
what
the
we
charlatan is
that's
the
what we
one.
would call it.
The charlatan is the one who tries to install Windows onto your screen,
And
Where-
then give you blue screen of death.
whereas whereas the master is analogously speaking is the guy that says, oh well, there's Linux and there are these varieties. This
Right.
is this strength, this is that strength, this is this
Actually,
weakness, this is that weakness.
The necessity for operating systems emerged from the basic input-output system of the hardware, right? To point to that kind of stuff, right?
And then there were controlled ones, and then there was like, hey, you need to actually exert control over it, but here are some ways to do that with. Do it this way, that way, or the other way. It's your choice. BSD, Linux.
Sure, right? You've got a pile of hardware. It's potential, I guess you could say.
It generally all works the exact same way. However,
Mm-hmm.
do you want it to be worked in a way that...
And there's, yeah, interestingly, like that through the BIOS or whatever you'd say, like the hardware is presenting a unanimous, uniform language of like, here's how to control
Me.
all the things that can happen. Here's the language set to use. Here's the valid parameters, all the ranges that are valid. Have at it.
BIOS
And then you've
drivers.
got Windows, then you've got Linux, then you've got DOS on top of to control that hardware.
Yeah,
and do things, right?
With Windows and Apple going like, if you don't do it this way...
I'm gonna shit myself.
No, I'm just gonna like pretend you don't even exist in the
Oh, yes.
entire universe.
Right.
You fucking twat.
Intentionally. Well, they reversed some of their stances.
Apple
like that
hasn't.
with
No, Apple is killing shit right now on the web the way
I
Internet
saw
Explorer used to be.
just a small story about text messaging on phones. The Apple interface is going to become more friendly to non-Apple ways of liking or hearting or replying to messages in text, right? It's not going to feel as broken, intentionally broken, just for the sake of, because that's not my environment.
They're literally still breaking the web like hard. They're actually doing IE level shit. It's disgusting.
With Safari.
Yeah. Because so many people are with Safari and they won't
I
switch.
keep using Safari all the time, all day long, man.
So they're killing the
It's the
idea,
best.
because of their app store, they're killing the idea of applications such as our idea of the dashboard of actually existing. They're saying like it's because it's not like part of the operating system and it's on the web
Google
yeah.
Who's it? Google or
As if a
Android?
fucking browser is not in a goddamn operating system. Fuck you.
Every major OS vendor, let's say, has an interest in locking down their app environment.
Okay.
Right.
It's
So
2000
for security problems and all that,
We're-
like your phones are just gonna get fucked if you let just anybody click on a website and install a new app on your phone.
But we're in 2020s, and we've tried that. And what have we found out?
I'm trying to imagine the alternative, and like I'd love to have sweet software that I can keep on top of, like exactly what's like going on, like a surgeon on my phone. I'd love it, but I don't think we're there. I don't think anybody's ready for that, to start watching like really what's going on their phone,
All open source is the next way to do this.
to try and vet
So-
source code
Yeah,
as
you-
being
you
legitimate,
like
because there's nothing
literally-
extra, because thousands of people have looked at it.
Exactly, literally, don't give a shit because everybody else already fucking tested it.
Hmm. That's legit.
And fuck Apple. Like,
That's true.
To be honest, like, why would we care about their assertion of it's good and then it goes haywire?
Mhm.
Versus a whole bunch of people.
Right.
It's like, hey,
No, I've
it's not
always
going
been,
haywire.
behind the OSS movement, I guess, if you could say, or
But in
if
order
that
for
wasn't co-opted yet or whatever.
in order for it to remain free, as in free from influences, it can't be open source. It has to be the original of the very unfortunate Stallman variety.
What's that? I don't get what you just said.
Unfortunate because Stallman is the guy that eats his own toe cheese for some reason. Jam,
Oh, I've
toe
seen it.
jam. You've seen the actual video? I didn't watch that shit.
It was
Ew.
it wasn't toe jam. It was a layer of skin.
Gross. You still don't do
It
that in
wasn't the jam. It was the meat.
You don't do that in public, even if you
on
have a
TV
thing.
during an interview or whatever. That's whatever.
I mean,
Okay, so
come on.
that's just. I'm glad we could. Somebody's gonna watch this and see that and look it up. Google
Right.
it. So we've done our part.
At any rate, he had one correct idea in his copyleft schema, in that the only way you use the rule for the whole non-copy stuff is to ensure copying. Mimicry. Continue the mimicry. Allow the variety of mimicry to continue.
By how doing what?
So GPL prevents one from ever modifying the software in any way and making it back available to the public, so you can tinker with it yourself.
Without
you have to
also having the same license.
not just having the same license, adding to the code what you've fucking done. Adding
Bringing
to
it back.
Yeah, feedback.
Yeah, there's like sub licenses that would let you commercially like use it, but like somehow
It's to play better with
keep it private.
It's to play better with the existing situation of software, but still to lean towards
to try and give options, but really it's not about.
So there's lesser GPL. A lesser GPL has less stringent requirements.
Yeah, that's probably it.
But the point being is that it's the only license that has done it correctly. By correctly, I mean block every attempt at non-mimicry. That just...
What does that mean?
If a new idea materializes into a coherent evolution, it's spread.
From the original source code?
Yeah. So if there is a mutation, it spreads across the community.
With the original license.
Right.
As a new thing.
Right. So it's never... So it's perpetual. So that there's never a case in which
I feel
it
like
stops.
there was a...
Unless it dies.
This caveat, the lesser thing for business to like just take in code and modify it and use it, but like not publish it, but also not share the software. Just have it internal, like never give it out. You know what I mean? Like that's something you can never stop. So I feel like that was
There are
contained within the.
There are specific cases in which you don't want to block the usage of the software based on the idealistic technicalities. There are few. They're very specific to like library usage.
Like if you are running a server and you've modified some code, you don't necessarily have to tell everybody how you modified it because it doesn't affect anybody. But if you try and share that server code, how to run this server, then you must give the source. That's kind of the thing. There was an exemption for that. I thought I remembered.
I'm not
seemed
clear.
logical.
The legalese I'm not clear about
Because you can't stop that anyways. Modify
Yeah.
code. How do you enforce?
The point is
like
not
that?
to stop modification. The point is to block the ability to prevent the evolution. So if the modifications are made, they should be made public.
And it's that time.
But the caveat will be specifically such that
Yep. Keep going.
you're only obligated to share in any real sense if you, like you were saying,
If you give a program.
if you share the actual outcome.
If you allow someone else to do the server.
Right. So you modified the program.
Right.
You gave the modified program to somebody. Give them the code.
That's it. Hey, come back. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, just thought we should have do the, what is it, the final thumbs? Anyways, we're good. Hope you are.